Romantic Tales. Chapter 131. Then how did you know it was virtuous consort dowager's people? Yili asked curiously. Feng Jiao smiled proudly and said, the coroner found a little bit of jasmine-scented hair oil between the girl's fingers and on her hair. This kind of hair oil is said to be a special kind of hair oil from the #1 spice shop in the capital. It is very expensive. A small box costs more than 10 taels of silver. In the last 3 months, only 5 boxes of this kind of hair oil were sold in the entire capital. 2 of them were bought by Virtuous Consort Dowager. Therefore I guessed that the girl was Virtuous Consort Dowager's hairstylist. Also yesterday morning Virtuous Consort Dowager changed her hairstyle. According to the people I sent who are very experienced in dressing, that hairstyle was not made by the same person as the one Virtuous Consort Dowager was used to. Yili nodded in admiration and said, therefore the matter was that Princess Lingyun was not willing to marry Prince Li, so she schemed to help Princess Xixia enter the princely palace so that she could openly break off the marriage? And it just so happened that Virtuous Consort Dowager was not satisfied with Princess Lingyun as a daughter-in-law, so she beat her at her own game so that Princess Xixia could replace her? But this is not reasonable. How is it not reasonable? Feng Jiao did not understand. Yili said, unless Lei Tingfeng was also involved in this matter. Otherwise, if Lei Tingfeng did not forcefully take Princess Lingyun away, no matter how much trouble Princess Lingyun caused, she still had to obediently get married in the end, right? This way, not only would her plan not succeed, it would also give her another opponent in the princely palace. Or did she just want to use Prince Li and Princess Xixia's weakness to threaten them? What if Prince Li and Princess Xixia were willing to fight to the death and tell the emperor about her plan? Even if she was the Xiling princess, she would not be able to escape. Li, why do you think Lei Tingfeng left in such a hurry? Mo Shuyao asked softly. Yili thought for a moment and said, Lei Tingfeng discovered that Princess Lingyun was being schemed against? Feng Jiao nodded and said, if Princess Lingyun is still in the capital, once this matter is investigated, even if His Majesty doesn't want to punish her, it will be impossible. But now that he was gone, if the emperor didn't want to destroy the relationship between the 2 countries, then he could only pretend that nothing had happened. They couldn't possibly send troops to attack the West Hill just because of this, could they? However, with this mess, Lei Tingfeng's trip to the Dechu state can be considered a waste. A good marriage plan had been ruined by that silly girl Princess Lingyun. Lei Tingfeng would definitely be so angry that he would vomit blood. Yili sighed. She turned to look at Mo Shuyao and asked, should I be glad that I'm not worth his time and effort? Mo Shuyao smiled. Indeed, we should rejoice. After all these years, Jingli has really made me see him in a new light. Feng Jiao curled his lips and said, I don't think so. The truly powerful one is the one by his side. If he really is that scheming, why would he give up and marry Ying? Mo Shuyao smiled and said, what about Princess Consort Li? She is the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue and Yi Zhaoyi's younger sister. Feng Jiao said disdainfully, sister-in-law is also the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue and Master Qingyun's granddaughter. Mo Shuyao, do you know why His Majesty is not worried about me marrying Princess Li? Asked Mo Shuyao. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. Mo Shuyao said, the Su family will not rely on anyone and will not help anyone fight for the throne. His Majesty understands this, I understand it, and Mo Jingli naturally understands it as well. It is impossible for him to receive any help from the Su family. On the contrary, if he intends to raise an army or conspire to harm the people, the Su family may even become an obstacle to him. Back then, the ancestors of the Su family personally killed the emperor and did their best to assist the emperors of the Dechu state. This was not a legend. However, Mo Jingli probably only thought that the Su family was loyal to the emperor. After all, the true secrets were passed down between the emperor, Prince Ding, and the head of the Su family. Even so, putting aside the Su family, Yi Zhaoyi is also the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue. She is also Minister Ye's legitimate daughter. At least third Miss was betrothed by the late emperor. Feng Jiao said. Yili pursed her lips and smiled faintly. I can roughly guess this. The 2 of them looked at Yili at the same time. Yili lowered her eyebrows and said, my father should be one of the Empress Dowager's people. He should know Prince Li's thoughts and the Empress Dowager's intentions. However, if he marries me, he probably thinks that Prince Li won't care about the Yi family in the future, but the Su family behind me. However, fourth sister's birth mother's family is weak. If fourth sister becomes Prince Li's consort, perhaps the future will be completely different. The Yi family will rise to the top in the future. Right now, there is the Empress in the palace, and the favored concubine is noble consort Lu. There are also many princes. If father really is one of the Empress Dowager's people, he should know that second sister is not favored. Therefore, from the emperor's point of view, the chances of second sister's child are not high. Moreover, it's not certain if the child can be born. Thinking back to the past few days, Yili really admired her father. Everyone thought that he married Yi Ying to Prince Li to support Yi Jiaoyi in the palace. However, they didn't know that Yi Jiaoyi was actually the spare chess piece. What a good plan. It was a pity that Yi Ying didn't choose well. If there were two Yi Yu, perhaps Yi Shangshu's plan could succeed. In fact, it wasn't these ancient people who were stupid. It was her who had always looked down on these people who was stupid. With old Madame Ye's shrewdness and Yi Shangshu's cautiousness, how could she think that the two of them were conceited just because Yi Jiaoyi was pregnant? What a surprising deduction. Feng Jiao looked at Yi Li and said, "Why does Princess think that Yi Shangshu is one of the Empress Dowager's people? Even the person on the dragon throne couldn't think of this." However, Princess Ding didn't guess wrong. Yi Li said faintly, "Father seems to show dissatisfaction with Prince Li from time to time. However, he has never done anything to affect Prince Li. Since he has already married his most valued daughter to Prince Li, why does he always show dissatisfaction with him? Seems like he is doing it for everyone to see." Last time the betrothal was Princess Lingyun. It was said that the Empress Dowager and Prince Li were not satisfied. Father's attitude was very tough. Of course, there was also the concern for fourth sister's future. However, this time with father's intelligence, it is impossible for him to not see that Princess Xixia will definitely enter Prince Li's palace. Even if she changes her identity, Princess Xixia's position in Prince Li's palace will not be low. However, this time father didn't seem to say anything. Even fourth sister was sent back by father on the day she went home. Fourth sister told me that father is already preparing to send fifth sister into Prince Li's palace as a Shu Fei in a month. He said it is to help fourth sister consolidate favor and prevent Princess Xixia from taking the lead. Mo Shuyao looked at Yi Li and said with a faint smile, "What Li Li said is correct. Yi Shangshu. For him to be able to ascend to the position of Shangshu so early, it is indeed related to the Empress Dowager. However, I am more inclined to meet the source of both sides." Yi Li blinked and said, "You are saying that father plans to see which side has a higher chance of winning before betting on which side? The current paranoia is not something that normal people can understand. If Darren is not loyal, he will not believe him." Chapter 132. Even though she had already figured out many problems, Yi Li still felt shocked. Her father, who looked smooth, was actually really smooth and was muddle-headed when it came to family matters, was actually a double agent. But what is going on with the Empress Dowager and the Emperor? Yi Li said. Feng Jiao sneered and said, "What else can it be? Our Empress Dowager is known as a heroine of a generation, the Yao Shun of women. In the past she helped the Emperor ascend the throne when he was young, but our Emperor was not someone to be trifled with. In less than 3 years he took back all the power and respectfully asked the Empress Dowager to retire to the inner palace to enjoy her old age. Something like power, it is fine if you have not tasted it, but once you have tasted it, it is easy to not be able to stop. The Emperor and the Empress Dowager have not been on good terms for a long time. This is something that many of the nobles in Jing know. Even though the throne will not change, the person on the throne can change. So, the one with the true ambition is not Mo Jingli but the Empress Dowager? Mo Jingli naturally has the ambition, but he does not have the opportunity. Now that he has the opportunity, why would he not cooperate? The Li Palace is his residence. Without his permission, even the virtuous Xiao Dowager cannot do anything she wants. Yi Li was speechless. No wonder the Empress Dowager did not mind the brothers fighting. So she wanted her 2 sons to fight to the death? Power, is it really that important? Feng Jiao stilled and said with a dim expression, "It is probably very important to some people." After a moment of sadness, Feng Jiao quickly laughed again. He winked at Mo Shuyao and said, "How about it, Prince? Since the 2 in the palace have started to play their cards, should we also play a game? Or, should we kill them all?" "Kill them all." Mo Shuyao glanced at him, "Then you will clean it up?" You will be responsible for killing inside and outside the palace. If there is a rebellion, you will be responsible. If the northern tribes invade, you will stop them. If Xiling also wants to participate, you will guard the border. Feng Jiao rubbed his nose awkwardly. As expected, it wasn't difficult to kill a few people. However, the consequences of killing those people were very troublesome. Whether or not the Empress Dowager and her brother were secretly competing with each other was naturally not something that Yili could interfere with. However, whenever someone from the Yi residence came to ask her to return, she would usually find an excuse to return. Although Minister Yi was dissatisfied with his daughter who was obviously out of his control, Yi Li's identity as Princess Ding was there. No matter how dissatisfied he was, he couldn't say or do anything. Actually, under normal circumstances, if the Empress Dowager and the two brothers Emo Jingli wanted to fight for the throne, no matter who it was, they would try to rope in Emo Shuyao. However, on one hand, Emo Shuyao was a useless person in the eyes of outsiders. On the other hand, Emo Jingqi probably wanted to get rid of the Ding King residence as soon as possible. Therefore, the days in the Ding King residence were still peaceful. No matter which side it was, they didn't expect Emo Shuyao to stand on their side. Of course, they also believed that Emo Shuyao wouldn't stand on the other side. Princess Consort, Miss Biao asks for an audience. Yili put down the needle and thread in her hand. She raised her head and asked curiously, Miss Biao? No. Chanru? Why did she come to the main courtyard? The Ding King residence was very big, very big. Moreover, there were many places that one couldn't go to just because they wanted to. Therefore, even if there were two people who didn't make people feel comfortable living in the residence, Yili wouldn't be able to sense the existence of side consort Yang and Miss Biao under normal circumstances. Because ever since Emo Shuyao moved to the main courtyard, the security of this courtyard had obviously been upgraded. Not to mention entering the main courtyard without permission, they couldn't even get close to the outer courtyard. After being rebuffed twice and being reprimanded by Chief Steward Emo sent by Emo Shuyao, side consort Yang didn't try to challenge the new Princess Consort Ding's authority anymore. Emo Shuyao had always been good to her. Yili could obviously feel it. Not to mention that Emo Shuyao had generously given her power when she had just married into the family. He had also clearly expressed his attitude towards her, the princess consort, in front of the servants in the residence. Otherwise, not to mention the Ding King residence, even the servants of an ordinary family wouldn't be so easily tamed by a new daughter-in-law. Therefore, it was very important to have someone to support her. Especially when this person was the person with the highest authority in the residence. This servant doesn't know. However, Miss Biao has already been standing at the entrance of the outer courtyard for quite some time. That's why the guard outside asked someone to inform Prince Consort. Jing'er, who came in to report, said, because the prince had instructed that outsiders were not allowed to enter the inner courtyard to disturb the princess consort, they would normally ask people to leave. However, Miss Biao, who had been easily dismissed the previous few times, wasn't willing to leave so easily today. The guards couldn't do anything to Miss Biao. After all, she was a guest. They could only ask Jing'er, who was passing by, to come in and report. Prince, what do you think? Yili tilted her head and asked Emo Shuyao, who was sitting by the half-opened window and reading a book. Emo Shuyao didn't even look at her. He flipped a page of the book and said indifferently, if Miss Li wants to see her, then let her come in. If she doesn't want to see her, then let someone send her back. Or, the Wang residence has another courtyard outside the city. She can accompany side consort Yang there for a few years. Yili clicked her tongue. This man was truly heartless. Even though she hadn't seen Yang Chanru for a long time, but the few times they met, she had looked at him with tactful resentment and tenderness. He could actually say such cold and heartless words. But she liked it. Let her come in. Putting aside the clothes that were almost finished, Yili said with some vexation, side consort Yang had mentioned to me before about finding a good marriage for Miss Biao, but she had never been a matchmaker before. Emo Shuyao said indifferently, don't trouble yourself. You won't be able to find one. What do you mean? What did he mean by she couldn't find one? Emo Shuyao said, this matter was mentioned by Chief Steward Emo 3 years ago. However, neither side consort Yang Chanru nor herself were satisfied with the candidate he proposed. You're not familiar with the capital. I don't think you can find a better candidate than the one Chief Steward Emo listed. Yili couldn't help wiping her sweat. So Emo Xiuyao had also been a matchmaker before. But he had directly asked Chief Steward Emo to do it. She was really stupid to worry about whether she should attend more banquets. Chief Steward Mo's people are too bad? Emo Xiuyao looked up at her and said, Chief Steward Emo listed the best candidates that could be found with her qualifications. Moreover, she's already 17. There are even fewer unmarried people around her age. Not everyone was like Emo Xiuyao, Emo Jingli and Su Qingchen who were over 20 and still unmarried. Even if they weren't, most people were already engaged. Then what should we do? She couldn't really delay her life like this, right? And it wasn't that Yili was narrow-minded, but she really suspected that if this continued, it would become Emo Xiuyao's responsibility in the end. If she wants to marry, then let Chief Steward Emo send the list over. If she doesn't want it, then don't worry about it. If she's not married when she's 18, then send her to Wuyuan Nunnery to accompany sister-in-law. Yili couldn't help but want to shed a tear for the affectionate Miss Yang. What was called being considerate? Just look at Emo Xiuyao's performance. Chapter 133. A short while later, Yang Chanru was gracefully led in by someone. She was accompanied by 2 young maidservants, and one of them was holding a box of unknown contents in her hands. Seeing Yang Chanru suddenly look at a certain place behind her, Yili looked at the unfinished clothes on the side and suddenly had a bad feeling. May please sit. Yili nodded to Yang Chanru with a smile. Yang Chanru quickly looked behind Yili. She quickly shook her head and said in a low voice, Many thanks, Wang Fei. No need. I'll just stand. Yili was speechless. What do you mean by you'll just stand? You're just a Biaomei living in a Wang Fu. Do you need to act like a mistreated concubine? She looked at Yang Chanru's moon-white robe with orchid embroidery. Her fresh and exquisite hair had a pearl hairpin in it. Ever since Yili had cleaned up Emo Xiuyao's plain clothes, this girl had finally bid farewell to her white robe fluttering in the wind. But she still walked the path of elegance and nobility. May please sit. Yili's voice was slightly deep as she said lightly. Yang Chanru was shocked and her expression clearly became terrified. Under Yili's gaze, she carefully sat down with a wronged expression. That wronged appearance made Yili feel like a mouthful of blood was stuck in her chest. It was disgusting to spit it out, but it was even more disgusting to swallow it. She didn't bully her. Biaomei has come to the main yard at this time. Is there something you need? Yili suppressed the displeasure in her heart and asked Yang Chanru. Yang Chanru raised her head and nervously twisted the handkerchief in her hand with a red face. I. Yili smiled patiently. Yang Chanru glanced at Emo Xiuyao. She seemed to have finally gathered her courage and said, Tomorrow is my cousin's birthday. I'm here to give him a birthday gift. Yili glanced at the box in the hands of the servant girl behind her. She turned her head to glance at Emo Xiuyao, who seemed to be engrossed in his book. She smiled and said, So that's how it is. Thank you for the trouble. Have a look. Is it inconvenient? In that case, please have a look, Prince. She waved her hand, indicating for the servant girl to bring the box to Emo Xiuyao. Hearing Yili's words, Yang Chanru's eyes lit up. She looked expectantly at the person sitting by the window reading. The little girl had just walked in front of Emo Xiuyao when the box in her hand was suddenly grabbed by a hand that reached in through the window. It was unknown when Ajin had appeared by the window. She held the box with a focused expression and opened it. She reached out to take a look at the thing inside. From Yili's direction, she could see that it was a gorgeous snow blue robe. Although she could only see a corner, the embroidery was indeed very exquisite and meticulous. It's not poisonous. Ajin, move aside. You're blocking the light. Emo Xiuyao said lightly. Ajin responded. She hugged the box and disappeared through the window. From beginning to end, Emo Xiuyao did not even see a corner of the robe. Yang Chanru was stunned. She hurriedly asked, Where did he take it? Yili wondered if she should tell him that the things that Emo Xiuyao did not want were all taken by Ajin to play with. After playing with them, she threw them away. Emo Xiuyao put down the book in his hand and looked up. Under Yang Chanru's surprised and expectant gaze, he said calmly, If there's nothing else, go back to your own courtyard. Tomorrow, I will ask Steward Emo to send a list of suitable men for the trial marriage. You can choose one. Yang Chanru's delicate face suddenly turned snow white. Sparkling tears kept falling down. No, cousin, I don't want to. I don't want to leave the palace. I don't want to get married. Don't drive me away. Emo Shuyao frowned. He quickly nodded and said, that's fine. Tomorrow, pack up your things and go to Wuyuan Nunnery to accompany sister-in-law. Just like this, send Miss Yang back. Yang Chanru's maids were all maids of the palace. Naturally, they did not dare to disobey Emo Shuyao. Even though they knew that their young miss was unwilling, they still went forward to help her leave. Ooh, don't drive Chanru away. I'll be obedient and won't make cousin angry. Yang Chanru sobbed. She struggled and refused to leave under the support of the two maidservants. Take her away. Emo Shuyao frowned and said calmly. No matter how much Yang Chanru struggled, she was not a match for the two maids who were taller than her. In the end, she was almost dragged out. Yili sat on the side and silently looked at Emo Shuyao's calm face. Hearing the faint sound of Yang Chanru crying, she could not help but sigh in her heart that this man was really cruel. When an ordinary man saw a beautiful and weak girl crying like that, even if he did not love her, he would still feel some pity. However, Emo Shuyao's eyes did not have the slightest emotion. It was as if the girl who was dragged out was not a weak girl, but an object that he did not need anymore. Li, why are you sighing? Emo Shuyao asked. Yili could not help but sigh again and said, whoever falls in love with you must have done something wrong in their previous life. Otherwise, they must have owed you some debt in their previous life. Emo Shuyao stared at Yili's back and asked, why do you say that? Yili said, does it even need to be said? Just look at Yang Chanru and you will know. Falling in love with someone who did not love or did not love at all, if that was not a debt in their previous life, then what was it? Was it a tragedy to be born? Then, what kind of person will Li fall in love with? Emo Shuyao asked. Yili sat on the needlework in her hand and casually replied, love? I don't know, I probably won't fall in love with anyone. No matter how touching love is, it will become family after a long time. Since that is the case, why not live a good life from the beginning? Who could spend their life with sweet words and honeyed words? After a long time they would only be left with daily necessities. Then is it because Li has not fallen in love with anyone? Emo Shuyao asked in a low voice. Yili's needlework paused for a moment, then she quickly moved again and said, perhaps. Of course she had fallen in love before, but to say that her love was unforgettable, she really had not. If Li falls in love with someone, will she live and die with them? Yili turned her head and looked at the man who was leaning against the wheelchair with a strange expression. She smiled and said, Prince, are you trying to say that if you fall in love with someone, you will live and die with them? Perhaps. I probably won't. Do you think that if I die, I will drag someone down with me? Yili thought about it realistically and said, even if it is just ordinary love, you can't do that. Is it a lover or an enemy? Under the sunlight, Emo Shuyao seemed to be seriously thinking about it. After a while he said in a low voice, you are right. If I die, I still hope that she lives well. After saying this, he no longer paid any attention to Yili and picked up the book he had not finished to continue reading. Yili did not expect that Emo Shuyao, who she had always thought was gentle, indifferent and somewhat emotionless, would be so gentle. She shrugged in confusion and turned back to continue embroidering. After a while, Emo Shuyao's words appeared in her mind again. If I die, I still hope that she lives well. Chapter 134. Her. Yili was so shocked that the embroidery needle almost poked her finger. Emo Shuyao had someone he liked. Yili's mood was not good, very bad. Even though she did not understand why it was so bad. In short, she was inexplicably depressed. This kind of situation was very rare in her decades of life. Even when she broke up with her first boyfriend and went on her first mission, she did not seem to be in such a bad mood. So after venting for a while in the martial arts field and finding that her mood did not improve, Yili decisively decided to go out to relax. Coincidentally, Hua Tianxiang had sent an invitation to her to admire the lotus flowers in the early summer, so Yili did not hesitate to agree. The Chu capital was in the north and there were not many places to admire the lotus flowers. So it was destined that the place to admire the lotus flowers in June and July every year would be filled with tourists. The lotus flowers in the early summer had not fully bloomed and it had already attracted the noble young ladies of the capital to come in droves. When Emo Shuyao heard that Yili was going out to admire the lotus flowers and did not have the intention to invite him, he did not say much. He only told Yili that the Ding King Fu had its own pleasure boat and that Yili could invite her friends to go with her. Yili had been displeased with Mo Xiuyao these past 2 days and forgot to ask him if he wanted to go with her. She brought a few servant girls and went out very quickly. Ajin silently looked at his prince. The prince clearly wanted to go with the princess. Why didn't he directly tell the princess? On the pleasure boat of the Ding King Fu, Yili leisurely leaned against the window in a daze. Hua Tianxiang looked at the decoration of the pleasure boat with admiration and said with envy, "It is worthy of being the Ding King Fu's boat. This decoration is really extraordinary. But Li did Prince Ding specially decorate this boat for you? No one has left the Ding King Fu for many years. This boat is not like the one in the past." Yili looked at her lazily and said with a smile, "Your family's boat is not worse than this one. Is there a need to be like this?" Hua Tianxiang rolled her eyes in annoyance. "What do you know? How many people are there in my family? It was so crowded and noisy. You'll be comfortable. It's so quiet to be alone on a boat. But Prince Ding is also on the ship, then it's two. No, it's better if he's not here. If Prince Ding is here, then I'll be too embarrassed to stay here and freeload." Yili looked at the various pleasure boats on the lake not far away and said in confusion, "There are so many boats floating on the lake. Are they looking at lotus flowers or pleasure boats?" Hua Tianxiang giggled and said, "Look at the flowers and admire the people." These few days the lotus flowers had just bloomed and the weather was perfect. Of course there were many people coming out. Do you know how many scholars and beauties get married every year on this beauty lake? Beauty Lake. Yili glances at the vast lake. After seeing West Lake, Taihu Lake, Qiandao Lake and so on, this small beauty lake seems to have nothing to do with beauties. Hua Tianxiang shook her head helplessly. "Aren't you a little too unromantic? Don't you know why Jing'er didn't come with us today? Please enlighten me." "Because she's with second young master Su today." Hua Tianxiang gritted her teeth and glanced at Yili. "Speaking of which, I found it strange that you came alone today. I thought you would come with Prince Ding. I was planning to go and play with Murong." Yili glared daggers at her. "Then who was the one who invited me to come out? I was afraid you wouldn't know, so I gave you a reminder. Who told you to hide at home all year round and refuse to go out?" Hua Tianxiang muttered in dissatisfaction. Then she looked at the newly decorated decorations on the boat and said with a guilty conscience, "You have to remember it's Prince's birthday in a few days. You must ask him to come out and admire the lotus flowers. I'm sure he prepared this boat to admire the flowers with you. Maybe Prince Ding is thinking of how to kill me without leaving a trace." Yili was stunned. Looking at Hua Tianxiang's worried face, she couldn't help but smile. "You're thinking too much. Tianxiang Li. Today's weather was very good. Whether it was on the lake or the lakeside, there were songs and laughter, but no one else would shout so loudly except for Murong Ting." Yili and Hua Tianxiang came out of the cabin and saw Murong Ting standing outside another boat, shouting and waving at them. There was also a handsome young man beside her who seemed to be saying something to Murong Ting. However, Murong Ting was obviously impatient and didn't want to pay attention to him. Hua Tianxiang followed behind Yili and whispered with a smile, "That's the second young master of the Leng family, Leng Haoyu. Murong's fiancé?" Yili asked. "Yes. Ting didn't like him since she was young, but he liked to stick to Ting since she was young. Later Ting followed her father to the border. I didn't expect that he still liked to deliberately make her angry after coming back." Hua Tianxiang said with a smile. Obviously her impression of Leng Haoyu wasn't too bad. On the other side of the boat, the two people had already started to fight because Murong Ting wanted to use Qinggong to come to their side, but Leng Haoyu obviously refused. The two pulled and pulled on the deck and Murong Ting became angry and started to fight. In addition to them, there were also many other boats around. When they saw the commotion, they also came over. There were obviously many people who knew Murong Ting and Leng Haoyu, and they all joined in the commotion. Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, "How long do you think Leng Haoyu can last this time?" Yili watched for a while before saying, "Murong Ting can't beat Leng Haoyu at all. Leng Haoyu seemed to be fighting a lot, but his feet were much more stable than Murong Ting's." There was a playful smile on his handsome face, but his eyes were absolutely serious when he looked at Murong Ting. "You said he was letting Ting win?" Yili smiled and said, "General Murong loves his daughter as much as his life. Do you think he will really marry Ting to an ignorant and incompetent playboy?" This, Hua Tianxiang pondered. She really didn't think about this problem seriously. After watching enough, Yili smiled and said, "Let them row the boat away. I won't play with Murong today." Hua Tianxiang pulled her back. "Don't. Believe it or not, if you make Ting Er angry, even if we row the boat away, she will still dare to jump into the water." Yili thought about Murong Ting's temper. It was really possible. She could only smile and say to the boat over there, "Second young master Leng Murong, can you come over for a chat?" Murong Ting stopped, turned back and shouted, "Li, I am your friend. Why are you asking him to come?" Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, "Then are you coming or not? If you don't come, we will row the boat away." Murong Ting glared fiercely at Leng Haoyu, opened his hand, then stepped on his foot fiercely, flew away and landed on Yi Li's boat. Leng Haoyu smiled bitterly. He cupped his hands and said to Yi Li with a smile, "Thank you, princess." He also got up and left his boat and landed on Yi Li's boat. Yi Li instructed the boatman to row the boat away, then turned around and invited the two to go in together. The four people sat down. Qing Wan and others served new tea and snacks before leaving. Murong Ting sat beside Yi Li and ate snacks while glaring at Leng Haoyu, who followed her. Leng Haoyu only pretended not to see the daggers flying at him. He smiled at Yi Li and said, "The weather is quite good today. Why don't I see the prince and princess traveling together?" Chapter 135. Yi Li raised her eyebrows, looked at Leng Haoyu and asked with a smile, "Second young master Leng is familiar with our prince?" The teacup in Leng Haoyu's hand paused slightly and he said with a smile, "I'm just a playboy, how could I have the chance to be familiar with Prince?" Murong Ting snorted and mocked, "You still know that you're a playboy? Ting." Leng Haoyu looked at her aggrievedly, "What's wrong with being a playboy? There's food to eat and play and I can accompany you every day. It's so good to have Big Brother to worry about the family matters." Bah! Murong Ting almost wanted to jump up. This girl hates good-for-nothing playboys the most. You stay away from this girl in the future. Otherwise, this girl will beat you up every time I see you. Now you also beat me up every time you see me. Leng Haoyu murmured in a low voice, but his voice was just loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. Yi Li and Hua Tianxiang couldn't help but cover their mouths and snicker. Murong Ting was so angry that her face turned red, and she couldn't wait to stab this bastard who embarrassed her to death. Leng Haoyu seemed to be very afraid of Murong Ting and he just kept begging for mercy. However, looking at the faint and doting smile in his eyes, one could tell that he was actually playing with Murong Ting. Yi Li and Hua Tianxiang looked at Murong Ting, who was still angry, and looked at each other with a smile. Indeed, the onlooker sees more clearly than the person involved in the situation. As Murong Ting's friends, they naturally hoped that Murong Ting could be happy in the future, but it was still Murong Ting's own choice. "Princess, the Li Palace's ship is in front." As the four were talking, Qing Xia came in to report. Hua Tianxiang frowned and said, "Li why did we meet Li Wang again?" Yi Li said with a smile, "Who told you not to pick a good day? Or it can be said that the capital is really not big." Murong Ting pursed her lips and said, "I think it's a small world." Before Yi Li could speak, Qing Wan also came in and said with a face full of displeasure, "Princess, Li Wang and Princess Li request to see you. Let them in." Yi Li sighed. Not long after, Mo Jingli walked in with Yi Li. However, the people following Mo Jingli made Yi Li frown. The woman by King Li's side was different from her usual self. She was dressed in a light yellow robe with some makeup on her face and a veil covering her face. But from Yi Li's point of view, such embellishments were meaningless. No matter who it was, as long as they saw her, they would be able to recognize that this was Princess Xixia of Nanzhao. It had only been a few days. Was Mo Jingli trying to provoke his brother emperor? The palace hadn't announced Princess Xixia's death yet. "Greetings, Prince Li and Princess Li." Hua Tianxiang and the others stood up to greet them. Mo Jingli glanced at the people in the cabin, and finally turned his gaze from Yi Li to Leng Haoyu. He said in a deep voice, "Leng Haoyu?" Leng Haoyu smiled and said, "Prince actually recognizes me? It is truly an honor." Of course, Mo Jingli knew of Leng Haoyu's reputation. Looking at Murong Ting beside him, his expression relaxed slightly. He gave a light snort and said to Yi Li, "Why didn't Mo Xiuyao come out with you? What does it have to do with King Li?" Yi Li's heart was stifled. Hearing Mo Jingli's impolite tone, she immediately retorted without hesitation. As expected, Emo Jingli's expression immediately darkened. He said angrily, "Woman who doesn't know what's good for her." Yili rolled her eyes in her heart, too lazy to pay attention to him. Leng Haoyu looked at Princess Xixia behind Emo Jingli with great interest and said with a smile, "Prince, this beauty is..." His back was pinched by Mu Rongting. His fake smile immediately turned into a funny grimace. Emo Jingli coldly stared at him and said, "Didn't your big brother teach you not to ask what you shouldn't ask?" Leng Haoyu shrugged indifferently and said, "My big brother is very busy. Where would he have the time to teach me this?" Yili rubbed her eyebrows and said indifferently, "Prince Li, fourth sister, sit down and talk." Mu Rongting snorted and said, "I don't want to sit with some people. Li Tianxiang and I will go out and take a look first." Finished speaking, she gave Emo Jingli a sidelong glance and pulled Hua Tianxiang to leave. Her appearance was just short of saying that this lady didn't want to sit with him. Hua Tianxiang gave Yili an apologetic look and let Mu Rongting pull her out. She also didn't want to get along with Prince Li. Leng Haoyu saw Mu Rongting run out, then looked at Yili and Emo Jingli with hesitation in his eyes. Yili smiled and said, "Young Master Leng should go and watch Mu Rongting. Don't let her run around with Tianxiang." Leng Haoyu nodded and walked out. Not long after, Qing Wan and the others came in with tea and snacks, but they didn't go out after putting them down. They each stood respectfully in the cabin, waiting for the princess's orders. Understanding their thoughts, Yili laughed secretly in her heart but didn't say anything. "You all go out first. I have something to say to her," Emo Jingli ordered. Ying bit her lips and got up silently and left. Princess Xixia looked at Yili with hostility and didn't say anything. She followed Ying and left. But Qing Wan and the others were not so obedient. They still stood in a corner and looked at each other with concern, as if they didn't hear Emo Jingli's words. Emo Jingli said in a deep voice, "I told you to go out, didn't you hear?" Qing Shuang replied in a clear and loud voice, replying to Prince Li, "We heard. But our prince said to protect the princess's safety, so we naturally have to obey the prince's orders." Emo Jingli's eyes flashed with a cold light. He stared at Qing Shuang coldly and said, "You mean I will harm her?" Qing Shuang said, "We don't know. We are just in case. Prince, please forgive us." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Prince Li, there doesn't seem to be anything between us. They are all people I trust. If you have something to say, you can say it directly." Emo Jingli was silent. His eyes stared at Yili without blinking. Yili didn't say anything and let him stare. After a long time, Emo Jingli said coldly, "Yili, you lied to I." Yili was stunned. Lied to him? Where did this come from? Or did Emo Jingli find out what she lied to him again? "Prince, where did this come from? Slandering concubine I for no reason is not a good habit," Yili said faintly. Emo Jingli snorted and said, "You deliberately pretended to be so useless just to make I break the engagement first, right? You have already hooked up with Emo Shuyao, right?" Yili calmly held the teacup in her hand. She restrained herself from splashing the tea on the man's face. "Prince, I already told you. Fantasizing too much is an illness. You should treat it as soon as possible. Prince, just because you have a despicable personality doesn't mean other people have bad personalities." She wasn't satisfied with the marriage, but to say that she had hooked up with Emo Shuyao a long time ago? They were still as innocent as tofu with spring onions. Emo Jingli's face turned dark, but he didn't get angry like he usually did. Instead, he stared at Yili for a while and then revealed a malicious smile. Yili stared at him expressionlessly, but her heart was on guard. Emo Jingli lowered his voice and said to Yili with a smile, "Yili, you haven't consummated with Emo Shuyao yet, right? It can't be that. Emo Shuyao has really become a cripple, right? If it's like this, I can barely." Chapter 136. Bang. Before Emo Jingli could finish speaking, a fist hit his nose accurately and fiercely. 2 tubes of blood immediately dripped down. Emo Jingli widened his eyes in shock. Before he could recover, Yili had already stood up and slammed his head on the table. Damn Yili. The pain on his forehead finally made Emo Jingli recover from the shock of being attacked by Yili again. "I won't let you go." Yili gave Qing Wan a look to stop her from making a move, and a sneer appeared on her lips. Seeing Emo Jingli pouncing on her, she got up and rolled back to dodge. When Emo Jingli pounced on her again, she was already by another window. After failing to catch her twice and thinking of how he was attacked twice, Mo Jingli also guessed that Yili was not a weak woman. This time he used his martial arts and pounced on her fiercely, vowing to catch this woman who teased him. However, when Yili lowered her body, Mo Jingli felt a sharp pain under his armpit. He could not react in time and hit the window of the cabin. "Someone come quickly." Li Wang fell into the water. A shrill scream suddenly came from the originally joyful and leisurely Beauty Lake. The people on the pleasure boat not far away were dumbfounded when they saw a tall figure fall out of a wide and gorgeous pleasure boat, and then fell straight into the lake with a plop. When they reacted to the content of the scream just now, everyone was shocked. Li Wang fell into the water. The nearby pleasure boats came over one after another. Those who had a grudge with Li Wang found a place to watch the show. Those who had a relationship with Li Wang quickly ordered their servants to jump down to save him. With such a big commotion, the people outside the cabin naturally heard it. Murong Ting and Leng Haoyu rushed in first. "Li, are you okay?" Murong Ting pulled Yili and looked at her nervously. After confirming that Yili was fine, she sighed in relief and said with dissatisfaction, "What's wrong with this Li Wang? Ali, did he bully you?" Yili's voice was filled with fear as she smiled and said, "I'm fine. It's Prince Li. I don't know how he fell into the lake." Prince Yi Ying and Princess Xixia were shocked and quickly rushed to the window to look. Many people had already gone down to the lake to save people, but they did not see Mo Jingli's figure yet. Yi said anxiously, "How did Prince fall into the lake?" "He doesn't know how to swim." Third sister. This time Yi Ying did not suspect Yi Li. After all, Mo Jingli was still a man who was good at both civil and martial arts in Yi Ying's heart. No matter what, it was impossible for him to be silently thrown into the water by Yi Li. Yi Li did not care about comforting her frightened sister at this time. "It's okay. So many people went down to save Li Wang. He will definitely be fine." Yi Ying stared at the people in the lake with tears in her eyes without blinking. She did not care to say anything to Yi Li. However, Princess Xixia looked at the people in the cabin and turned to walk out. Yi Li said lightly, "Miss, where are you going?" I'm going to save Prince." "It's none of your business." Princess Xixia obviously knew that Yi Li recognized her. Thinking about how Yi Li had seen her in such a sorry state, Princess Xixia felt uncomfortable looking at Yi Li. She did not want to stay in the same cabin as her. Yi Li pulled Yi Ying and said, "Fourth sister, take this miss back to your ship. Since this miss is Li Wang's person as Li Wang Fei, you should take good care of the guest. Don't let anything happen to her." But Yi Ying hesitated. She hated Princess Xixia. What's more, Li Wang's life and death were unknown. How could she be in the mood to care about this? "All right, don't forget your identity." Yi Li frowned. "Li Wang will be fine. Don't mess things up." After persuading Yi Ying to leave, Yi Li smiled at the other three people. She sat down leisurely and watched the salvage work below. After a while, Li Wang was finally rescued from the water. Under the sunlight, one could clearly see that Mo Jingli's usually cold face had a large bruise on his forehead. It was probably because he had stayed in the water for too long. His nose did not look bad for the time being. Everyone hurriedly sent him to the Li Wang Fu's ship that was parked not far away. The onlookers gradually gathered around. Yi Li's side was much quieter. Leng Haoyu looked thoughtfully at Yi Li, who was leisurely leaning against the window, and said, "Is Wang Fei not worried at all?" Yi Li smiled faintly. "What's there to worry about? Young Masterling, don't worry. Li Wang is very lucky. Nothing will happen to him. Young Masterling also saw it just now. He's still alive, isn't he?" Murong Ting held her chin and asked curiously, "Why would Li Wang fall into the lake for no reason?" Every year during the golden period of the lake tour, there would always be one or two people who fell into the lake. However, they were usually insensible children or weak young ladies. Li Wang was a man who had practiced martial arts since he was young. How could he fall into the lake? Yi Li replied with a serious expression, "People make mistakes and horses stumble." Li Wang suddenly stood up. It was probably because the ship was unstable that he fell in. Had the ship ever been unstable? Murong Ting, who had been standing outside, was puzzled. His qinggong should be good. Li Wang is afraid of water. He probably forgot. Yi Li replied without changing her expression. Qinggong was not omnipotent, especially when one's legs suddenly went numb. Unless he had someone's ability to fly without using his legs. However, It would probably not be so easy to mess with Mo Jingli next time. Yi Li silently thought in her heart that she must be careful when she saw Mo Jingli in the future. Hua Tianxiang was not interested in how Mo Jingli fell. She said with some worry, Li Wang had an accident on your ship. The Empress Dowager and Xian Zhao Dowager. Yi Li blinked innocently. It's normal for the ship to be unstable. Li Wang drank wine and did not stabilize the ship properly. Do I have to take responsibility? Well, it seems to be my fault for not closing the window properly. Lung Haoyu's gaze swept to the only 2 open windows in the cabin. He said with a smile, although it's only the beginning of summer, the lake is still a little hot. I think everyone can understand why the princess forgot to close the window. Thank you, second young Master Ling, for your understanding. Yi Li smiled. Hua Tianxiang shook her head. We are fine. However, Li Wang has always been at odds with Prince Ding. He also has a grudge with you. You better be careful. Yi Li smiled and said, Thank you, Tianxiang. I'll be careful. If Mo Jingli really had the nerve to tell everyone that he was beaten by a woman, then she would not mind arguing with him. She would not rashly make a move without careful consideration. Thinking of Mo Jingli's miserable face just now, Yi Li suddenly felt that her fist was a little itchy. She secretly regretted that she did not punch him a few more times. Li Wang's mansion. Mo Jingli was awakened by the sound of sobbing. His entire body was in an indescribable discomfort, and Shifu's cries made him feel as though his brain had exploded. Shut up. Prince, you are finally awake. Ying rushed over in surprise. Princess Xixia also hurriedly squeezed over. Brother Jingli, how are you? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Chapter 137. Mo Jingli closed his eyes and finally remembered what happened to him. A breath was stuck in his chest and he couldn't let it out. Another earth-shattering cough came. Yi Ying hurriedly supported Mo Jingli to help him breathe. Prince, are you feeling better? Looking at Yi Ying's tear-stained face and thinking of a certain hateful woman's cold and emotionless face, Mo Jingli felt a wave of annoyance. Don't cry, I haven't died yet. Where's Yi Li? Princess Xixia lightly snorted and said, Brother Jingli, what are you talking about? Yi Li naturally went back to her Prince Ding mansion. Something happened to you on her bed and she didn't even come to take a look. So rude. Yi Ying glared at Princess Xixia. Third sister is much more polite than some people. Men and women are different. The prince is on the sickbed, why would third sister come to see him? Yi Ying wasn't stupid. Even her father couldn't stop Princess Xixia from entering the Li Palace. Although Yi Li didn't get along with her since they were young, she also had a grudge against Princess Xixia. Compared to Princess Xixia, she would definitely stand on her younger sister's side. Yi Ying remembered how Yi Li reminded her to watch Princess Xixia and not let her run around outside. After she came back, even the old concubine who had always been picky about her, made an exception and praised her. Yi Ying felt that sometimes it was right to listen to her third sister. After all, no matter how smart or powerful second sister was, she was in the palace and couldn't help her. Grandmother was right. After they got married they should support each other. Princess Xixia was furious. That incident was destined to make her unable to raise her head among the noblewomen in the capital. She would even lose her identity as the Princess of Nanzhao. Although she could put everything down and return to Nanzhao, even if she wasn't Princess Xixia, she would still be the high and mighty Princess of Nanzhao. But she really loved Brother Jingli. Even if she didn't have the identity of a princess, she would always be with Brother Jingli. Brother Jingli, look at her. Enough. Xixia, Inger, you guys go out first. I'm tired. Mo Jingli said impatiently. Although the two girls were usually not easy to deal with, they were still obedient to Mo Jingli's words. Seeing that his face had darkened, she could only silently get up and leave with a face full of reluctance. Lier. The room was quiet for a while before Consort Xian Zhao walked in. Mo Jingli hurriedly wanted to get up, but Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was one step ahead of him and pressed his shoulder to sit down by the bed. She frowned and said, How could you be so careless? Mo Jingli said in a low voice, This child has made Mu Fei worry. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort still stared at him and asked, How could you fall into the water without any reason? She was still on the boat of the Prince Ding mansion. How many times has Lady Mother told you not to provoke that Yi Li? Tell Mu Fei, was it Yi Li who caused you to fall into the lake? Emo Jingli's face darkened. After a moment of silence he said, I accidentally fell down. Accidentally? What time is it now and you're still not careful? Xian Zhao Dowager Consort reprimanded in dissatisfaction. Mu Fei won't ask you what happened this time. But from now on, stay away from the people of the Prince Ding mansion. You're also not allowed to provoke Prince Ding, do you understand? Emo Jingli disdainfully raised his eyebrows and said, Mu Fei, you and Mu Hu are placing too much importance on Emo Shuyao. Looking at his disdainful expression, Xian Zhao Dowager Consort sighed and said, You've been fighting with Prince Ding since you were young. Mu Fei knows that you don't put him in your eyes. But you have to remember clearly you can ignore Emo Shuyao, but you definitely can't ignore the Ding King's residence. Ding Mansion and Su family, we can't rope them in or offend them. So Mu Fei will not ask about today's matter. Even if you really suffered a loss, you have to swallow it for me. Emo Jingli was silent for a moment and said in a deep voice, I've made Mu Fei worry. This child knows. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort nodded and looked at Emo Jingli and said softly, Mu Fei knows that you're a good child. Sometimes you can't do everything according to your own preferences. When you get everything, won't it be up to you to decide what you want to do? Before that happens, you have to be patient. Many thanks for Mu Fei's teachings. This child understands. Emo Jingli respectfully nodded. The clothes that Yi Li spent a lot of time making were given to Emo Shuyao as a gift on his birthday. Of course, due to her bad impression of Beauty's Lake and the fact that Emo Shuyao might have another sweetheart, Yi Li did not accept Hua Tianxiang's suggestion to invite Emo Shuyao to tour the lake. Although she was more curious about where Emo Shuyao found a sweetheart who didn't leave the house all year round. Since he had a sweetheart, why did he marry her? Or did he have a sweetheart after marrying her? No matter which thought it was, it made her very unhappy. Because she didn't know which was more unlucky than being married in as a shield or having her husband cheat on her less than a month after marriage. Therefore, all the servants in the Prince Ding mansion didn't understand why the relationship between their prince and princess seemed to slowly return to the situation of the first few days of their marriage. It should be said that princess was distancing herself from the prince. Did they have a fight? But looking at how the two were still interacting calmly, it didn't seem like they had a fight. Emo Shuyao naturally knew that Yi Li was unobtrusively distancing herself from him. It shouldn't be said that she was distancing herself. She was unobtrusively returning their relationship to its initial state. But it clearly wasn't very successful. Because not only did Emo Shuyao discover it, even Yi Li's mama and the usually busy Sun Mama discovered it. But Emo Shuyao couldn't figure out the reason for this. It seemed that it started from the afternoon when Yang Chanru came to send the birthday gift. Alone in the study, Emo Shuyao silently pondered. He didn't think that Yi Li was angry because of Yang Chanru. Not only did they know that Yang Chanru was nothing, but with Yi Li's personality she wouldn't be angry because of such a woman. Then, it was because of their conversation? Emo Shuyao held the book but didn't read it. Instead, he silently recalled every word of the conversation that day. When Emo Shuyao was lost in thought in the study, Yi Li had already changed into men's clothes with Qing Wan and Qing Shuang and left the Fu. Princess Ding's identity was destined to attract attention wherever she went, so Yi Li couldn't help but learn how to disguise herself. Fortunately, Yi Li's disguise was very good. Of course, it wasn't the kind of human skin mask. She just slightly modified the skin color, eyebrows, and other details such as the Adam's apple and ear holes. Then a handsome youth with a slightly dull complexion came out. In addition, Yi Li's temperament was different from the women of this era. If not familiar people, it would be difficult to recognize her if they didn't look carefully. Thus, under the surprised expressions of Qing Wan and Qing Xiao, Yi Li was satisfied and left the two of them in the treasure pavilion to settle the score. Waving a folding fan that she casually grabbed, she swaggered out the door. The two shadow guards who followed Yi Li secretly worried for their prince. What kind of princess did the prince marry? If they didn't stare at the room that the princess went in and saw the handsome youth come out, they wouldn't dare to leave. In order to be careful, they went in to take a look. They almost lost the princess. They were the most senior shadow guards in the Ding King's residence. If they lost the princess, how could they still have the face to stay in the shadow guard? They would directly return to the barracks and train. But, looking at the elegant young master walking leisurely in front, and does he look like a woman? Chapter 138. She couldn't tell it all, Xiaoxi. Ever since she was able to practice martial arts without any restrictions, Yili felt that she didn't like her previous life more and more. After all, she was still pretending. She never had the temperament of a noble lady. Of course, she definitely wasn't lively and active. But she still needed to satisfy the normal human preferences for entertainment and leisure. As for Mo Xiaoyao's problem, she threw it to the back of her mind after thinking about it for 2 or 3 days. If Mo Xiaoyao really had a sweetheart and decided to peacefully break up with her, she could accept it. In any case, she had money. She believed that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't be stingy about the issue of alimony. But in this way, the matter of cultivating feelings and having children in the future would have to be put aside. She didn't have the hobby of having children with other people when she knew that they already had someone else in their heart. Therefore, Yili, who thought that she didn't need to cultivate feelings, decided to go out more when she had more free time. A married woman didn't need to be locked up at home every day. "Asan, where's Wang Fei going?" In the dark, Shadow Guard 4, who was silently following her, asked in a low voice. "How would I know? Wang Fei seems to want to leave the city." Shadow Guard 3 replied. "The prince and Wang Fei seem to be at odds. Wang Fei isn't planning to run away from home, right?" Shadow Guard 4 suddenly remembered that when they changed shifts yesterday, 1 and 2 seemed to have mentioned that the relationship between the prince and Wang Fei was a bit strange these days. "This shouldn't be." Shadow Guard 3 hesitated. "How about I follow Wang Fei and you go back and report to the prince? If Wang Fei really leaves home, can you stop her? What if you lose her?" Although they hadn't personally tested Wang Fei's strength, it was definitely different from those flowery martial arts. "This already lost her," Shadow Guard 3 exclaimed. They had just left the city. How did Wang Fei disappear? Was it because they were too absorbed in their conversation? "What are you talking about? Hurry up and find her." 2 shadow guards came out from the shadows and looked around for the princess's whereabouts. Although they didn't dare to get too close, they weren't too far away either. Wang Fei couldn't have gone too far in such a short time. Yili sat on the tree trunk and looked at the 2 shadow guards chattering below. They were good at hiding their tracks, but their personalities were a little off the charts. "Hey, don't you ever look up?" The 2 shadow guards passing by looked at the handsome young man sitting on the tree with embarrassed faces. That was because there had never been a princess consort who knew how to climb trees in the Prince Ding mansion. "Also, we walked around the tree for a long time, but we didn't even hear a breath." Princess consort." The 2 shadow guards wept silently. They had already decided that they would report to the commander when they returned today. They were not fit to be shadow guards. They had to train themselves from scratch. Yili nimbly jumped down from the tree and landed in front of them. "Thank you for your hard work. Your subordinate doesn't dare. I didn't plan on running away from home." Yili smiled as she looked at the 2 shadow guards with nervous expressions. The shadow guard 3 released a breath and carefully asked, "Then, Wang Fei, why did you leave the city?" "I just wanted to see how long you could follow me." Yili smiled slightly and nodded in praise. "Overall, it's not bad. But if I could control your eyes, it would be better. I just came out of the treasure storage pavilion and your eyes made it impossible for me to pretend I didn't know." Many thanks for Wang Fei's teachings. They had been discovered in less than a li. Was this praise? Yili looked happily at the depressed shadow guards in front of her and said, "You can follow me, but you won't tell anyone else what I do every day, right?" The 2 shadow guards were overjoyed. "Many thanks, Wang Fei. Ever since the first day of the prince and Wang Fei's wedding, the 2 of us and the other 2 have been Wang Fei's shadow guards. Unless Wang Fei's life is in danger, we won't reveal anything about Wang Fei to anyone else, including the prince." Shadow Guard 4 explained. Yili nodded. Mo Xiao had told her about the shadow guards in the Ding Wang Fu. She had confirmed in these days that these people had not told anything about her to Mo Xiao. But it didn't matter if they said it because what she would let them see was not a secret. "Perfect, this young master needs a few coolies. Come with me." Shadow Guard 4 looked at each other. They had said that they were shadow guards, right? On this day, the title of Princess Consort of Dinghua finally transcended the word woman. Wang Fei knew how to ride a horse? That was nothing. Most of the women in Xiling and the northern tribes knew how to ride a horse. Wang Fei knew martial arts? That was also nothing. They already knew about it in the Fu. But who could tell them why Wang Fei would bring 2 people to charge into the bandit stronghold? Alright, there were no bandits here now. The night that Wang Fei had been kidnapped, Feng Sangongzi had led the Black Cloud Cavalry to clean up this bandit stronghold called Black Cloud Peak. The brothers of the Black Cloud Cavalry were very depressed. The blind bandits dared to call it Black Cloud Peak and dared to provoke the prince. Wasn't this smearing the name of the Black Cloud Cavalry? They watched as Yi Li rode a horse over 100 li and then walked up the mountain. She didn't look tired at all. Shadow Guard 3 and 4, who had become Light Guard, were very depressed. Yi Li turned back and looked at the two in confusion. She raised an eyebrow. Why aren't you walking? Tired? The two shook their heads like rattles. Shadow Guard 3 gathered his courage to ask, Wang Fei, what are we doing here? Yi Li turned back and smiled at the two, climbing the mountain, taking a walk, going on an outing, relaxing. Killing you two to sell? Wang Fei. Shadow Guard 3 and 4 had been to Black Cloud Peak before, but when they went up the mountain they found that this place was completely different from the last time they came. The original stronghold on the mountain was not damaged. Instead, the traps that had been set to go up the mountain had been removed. The path up the mountain was much easier. Even though this wasn't much for people with strong martial arts like them, it was a big difference for normal people. And there were people living in the stronghold. They could see the smoke from cooking in the distance. Wang Fei didn't want to become a bandit, right? Or was there another group of bandits in Black Cloud Peak and Wang Fei wanted to bring the two of them to suppress the bandits? The three had just approached the stronghold when there was the sound of dogs barking. A while later, a spirited old man in his 60s came forward with a few elders and children. When he saw Yi Li, he came forward with a smile. Chu Gongzi. Yi Li nodded. Elder Wang, how about coming in? The old man leaned on his walking stick and nodded, saying, This old man is very well. It is all thanks to Gongzi's care. Gongzi, please come in. Yi Li invited the old man to go first. Walking in front of the old man, she asked as she walked, I can't come here often. Is Elder Wang happy here? The old man said, This place is not far from the capital. Everything is good. We've been carrying out young master's orders according to young master. Does Gongzi want to go take a look first? It is almost time for lunch. Gongzi must have not eaten since you came from so far away. If you don't mind the shabby conditions in the stronghold, why don't you eat first? Yi Li had come out in the morning and had not eaten lunch. She nodded in agreement. The old man happily ordered people to prepare lunch and personally invited Yi Li to a simple but clean room to rest. Chapter 139. Wang Fei, why is this place? When the old man left, Shadow Guard 3 couldn't wait to ask, but he couldn't figure out what to ask. Yi Li sat leisurely in the chair and said, You want to ask about this place? After I came here last time, I felt that this place was very good. So I thought of a way to buy it. This place was not far from Jing and it was not a desolate place. These mountains and forests naturally had owners, but because of the bandits, normal people did not dare to care. Shadow Guard 4 said in puzzlement, Why does Wang Fei want to buy this mountain? This place doesn't have any value. No matter if it was the trees or the plants on the mountain, they did not have high value. Also, this mountain did not look like it had any gold or silver mines. Yi Li blinked her eyes. I didn't plan to have any additional value in the first place. This is just an ordinary mountain. It's just a farm and a few more families at the foot of the mountain. Foot of the mountain? Shadow Guard 3 remembered that there was a large farm not far from the foot of the mountain. The Shadow Guards were not idiots. They knew that even if the farm at the foot of the mountain was Wang Fei's, Wang Fei still cared about something on the mountain. Otherwise, she would not have specially climbed up the mountain. Two pairs of eyes silently looked at the handsome youth in front of them. Yi Li helplessly closed the fan she was pretending to be elegant and said, All right, I'll take you to see it after lunch. I don't believe that you know how to follow the work ethic of the Shadow Guard. If you don't know, this master will personally teach you until you understand. Shadow Guard 3 couldn't help but shiver and instinctively replied, This subordinate understands. After eating a simple lunch, Yi Li thanked the old man and took the two Shadow Guards to the back of the mountain. Not long after, Shadow Guard 3 and 4 finally understood why Wang Fei had told them that she needed manual labor. Climbing down the cliff of the back of the mountain, there was a very large valley. The valley was filled with tall trees. Even though it was daytime, they could hear the howls of wolves in the distance. How could there be a place like this near Jing? Yi Li led them around the gloomy forest for a while, and finally found a group of people who were busy. These people were busy building some simple and crude houses. as well as some things that they had seen in the manor's martial arts field and many more things that they did not understand. What puzzled them the most was that they had been following Wang Fei for the past few days, but they had not seen Wang Fei do anything at all. What was going on here? The person who came forward to greet them was a burly man in his 30s. When he saw Yi Li, he immediately came forward to greet her. Master Chu. Yi Li nodded and said, "How's it going?" The burly man's face was full of a straightforward smile as he said, "Young master, don't worry. We won't dare to make a single mistake. Everything was done according to your instructions. What do you think?" Yi Li nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "I've already seen it. You've done very well." The burly man scratched his head and said with a smile, "Even though we don't know what these things are for, Master Chu has been kind to us and has given us work to do. We will definitely do well for you." Yi Li smiled and said, "No need to be polite. You're also earning money with your own strength. Today I've brought new blueprints. Take a look and see if there's anything you don't understand. You can talk about it in detail." Yi Li took out a thick stack of blueprints and handed it to him. The burly man opened it and looked over it. He said with a smile, "Young master has drawn it well. I'll take it to the masters to see. Does young master want to go together?" "I'll take a look first. I'll go after they're done." That man took the blueprints and left in high spirits. Yi Li looked at the two people with dull expressions and said, "You can ask what you want to ask." And C looked around and said, "Princess? Is Princess building a martial arts field?" There were a lot of things that were similar to the Fu. Yi Li nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "You have good eyes. You can say that I'm building a fun game field. Princess, your hobbies are really special. How did Princess find this place?" And San asked. I asked someone if there were any hidden and fun places near the capital. He recommended this place. I've been here once and felt that it was a pretty good place." And San frowned. He looked up and said, "It's easy for people to break in here, right? They had just come down from the cliff. And last time the Tianyi Pavilion master had escaped from below. This meant that there was more than one way in and out." Yi Li said with a smile, "If you're talking about the way out from below, I've already blocked it. If you want to go out or come in from this forest, I've already checked. The edge of this forest is 50 li or even farther. There's an even deeper cliff below. And there are swamps in the forest, all kinds of poisonous plants, birds and beasts. Don't you see the snake repellent everywhere around here? It was simply a hunting ground blessed by the heavens. It really isn't easy to find a place like this near the capital. If you plan on coming down from above like we did, when this place is fixed, the way up will also disappear. And, if you're not afraid of death, you can try using Qinggong to jump down." And San and Nc unconsciously leaned closer to the other. Hearing Princess' tone, the consequences of jumping down from above might be more serious than charging in from the forest. Princess building a place like this. For what? And San swallowed and asked with some difficulty. Yi Li smiled and said, "Didn't I say it already? It's just for fun. The conditions in the Fu are limited, it's too boring. After it's fixed, you can come here and stroll around when you feel bored. Your mood will definitely be better." And San and Nc's faces were filled with terror. They should have known that Princess with such special interests was definitely not a normal person. Everyone in the capital had been deceived by Princess. Even if the old prince came back to life, he would also be scared by such a fierce wife, right? Looking at the surrounding layout with satisfaction, Yi Li's smiling eyes dimmed. The days wouldn't be so peaceful forever, so she couldn't really act as if she didn't know anything and be a carefree princess consort of Dinghua. Eldest brother went to Nanjiang, third brother went to the military camp. If it wasn't for the unavoidable crisis in the future, eldest uncle wouldn't let eldest brother meddle in the affairs of the court. Qing Chen Gongzi's reputation was too great, and the Su family didn't need any more reputation. Then, before things happened, she had to make her own preparations so that she could protect her family in the future in her own way. San and Nsan told their partner Nsan and Nsan with Yi Li's permission about what happened at Black Cloud Peak. Yi Li didn't mention whether or not they could tell Imo Shuyao about this. But after Shadow Guard 1, 2, 3, 4 considered the issue of professional ethics that Princess Consort mentioned, they decided to be a Shadow Guard that abided by professional ethics. It had to be known that being abandoned by their master was the disgrace of being a Shadow Guard. From the moment they became the Shadow Guard for the Princess Consort, their first and only loyalty was to the Princess Consort, not to the prince. Yili was very satisfied with these shadow guard with professional ethics. After all, it wasn't easy to find people with such strong martial arts, outstanding abilities and trustworthy people. She also didn't want to waste time finding more guards. Chapter 140. Yili contentedly went to Black Cloud Peak about twice a month. Of course, she went there in disguise. The people on Black Cloud Peak and the people on the mountain all called her Master Chu Junwei. Sometimes she would bring Dark 1 and Dark 2, and sometimes she would bring Dark 3 and Dark 4. The four of them were clearly very interested in the strange martial arts field that was under construction. Occasionally they would fight in order to be able to go with Yili. Mo Xiuyao obviously knew that Yili often went out, but he didn't ask where Yili went. Yili was very grateful for his tolerance. Occasionally when she went shopping with Hua Tianxiang and the others, she would remember to bring back some good snacks for him. However, the relationship between the two seemed to have become more distant as Yili was busy. Occasionally when she saw the disapproving eyes of Wei Mama and Lin Mama, Yili would feel a little guilty. However, this guilt was quickly put aside. Because she was very busy, very busy. Not only did she have to take care of the affairs of the Wang Fu, she also had to take care of her dowry. The dowry shops were still being operated as they were on the surface, but Yili secretly took out almost all of the money from the dowry, including the money sent by Han Mingyue to buy some properties. This included the 2 residences and 3 shops that were bought in the name of Chu Junwei, as well as the 2 shops in the capital. Su Qingze had personally arranged for people to take care of these things. Although Su Qingze didn't understand what she wanted to do, he didn't ask anything and did as he was told. In less than half a month, the deeds to the residences and shops were sent to her. In the eyes of outsiders, Yili seemed to be a perfect princess consort. Every day she handled the affairs of the Wang Fu in an orderly manner, and from time to time she would attend all kinds of gatherings between the nobles in the capital. However, they didn't know that Yili was secretly gathering all kinds of information and finding some useful clues. Therefore, the scheming between the emperor and the empress dowager, the power struggles between the officials in court, and the secret gossip between the nobles, Yili coldly watched as they slowly flowed past her eyes. She also gained a deeper understanding of the disputes in the capital and the situation in the imperial court. Your Highness. Prince fainted. Yili was sitting in the accounting room lost in thought while looking at the account books. Qingxia rushed in and shouted in a panic. Yili was shocked. She immediately stood up and asked, "What's going on?" Qingxia, who had always been calm, was clearly frightened. She said with a sobbing voice, "Just now, Prince went back to his room, and asked where Princess Consort went. The servant said that Wang Fei was in the accounting room." Before Prince could say anything, Prince suddenly vomited a lot of blood. And then he fainted. Yili's heart trembled. She threw down the brush in her hand and walked out. As she walked, she asked, "Has a doctor been called?" Qingxia said, "A Jing and Qing Wan have both gone. Qing Yu knows a bit of medicine." She and Qing Shuang stayed in the room to take care of Prince. Without waiting for Qingxia to finish, Yili's figure had already quickly disappeared around the corner of the corridor. Returning to the yard, the Yahuan in the yard were clearly frightened. When they saw Yili, they even forgot to go forward and bow. Yili stepped into the room. Turning around the screen, she saw Mo Xiuyao lying on the bed. His face was as white as paper, and his lips were still stained with dark red blood. "Your Highness." Qing Yu, who had been taking Mo Xiuyao's pulse, stood up and said in a low voice, "How is he?" Qing Yu said somewhat worriedly, "Prince had once suffered a very serious injury. It seems that he did not properly nurse himself, so his body is actually very weak. Suddenly vomiting blood is also due to exhaustion. But if he vomited too much blood, I'm afraid it will be very disadvantageous for Prince." Following Qing Yu's gaze, not far from the bed, there was a large patch of blood that had not completely dried up. It was incomparably dazzling. That huge amount of blood almost made Yili frightened. "Now, is he all right?" Qing Yu shook her head and said, "This servant specializes in medicine and poison. Towards Prince's situation, this servant is truly helpless. But for the time being, there shouldn't be any problems." Yili took a deep breath and nodded, saying, "I know. Go see if the doctor has come. Also, ask Chief Steward Mo to come over." Qing Yu and Qing Shuang complied and left. Yili sat by the bed and silently looked at the person lying on the bed. She had always heard others say that Prince Ding's body was crippled and that he was plagued with a serious illness. But from the first time Yili saw Emo Shuyao, he had always been very healthy. Even when it was autumn and she had caught a cold for 2 days, she had not heard him cough once. So Yili had long forgotten about the serious illness. She only treated it as a false rumor spread by people outside. In these past few months they seemed to meet every day. But only now did Yili discover that Emo Shuyao seemed to be much thinner and more haggard than before. At this time the faint dark green shadow under his closed eyelids was clearly visible. Yili was in a daze when she felt the unconscious person on the bed move slightly. She hurriedly raised her head to look. Just in time to see Emo Shuyao slowly open his eyes. For eyes met. For a moment Yili only felt speechless. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. "Li, what's wrong?" After a while Yili looked at him and said, "You just vomited blood." Emo Shuyao was stunned. He smiled and said, "I've been a little tired these past 2 days. It's nothing serious." "It's nothing serious." Yili only felt a wave of anger rush from the bottom of her heart to her brain. "It's nothing serious even if you vomited blood. What's there to worry about? How much blood do you think you have to waste?" Emo Shuyao seemed to be happy to see Yili angry. The light in his eyes became brighter and gentler. "It's really nothing serious. I'm used to it. It's going to be winter soon. As long as you rest well, nothing will happen. Lee, believe me." "I'd be a pig if I believed you." Yili glanced at him unhappily. At the same time she was shocked by his words. Used to it? How could she get used to vomiting blood like that? "You rest first. We'll talk about it when the doctor comes." After a while Ajin and Qing Wan rushed in with the doctor. It was still the old doctor in Wuyue Nunnery last time. Seeing Emo Shuyao, who had woken up on the bed, the old doctor waved away Qing Wan and Ajin's hands and said slowly, "I've said that nothing will happen. You young people are too immature." Yili stood up and gave up her position to the old doctor so that he could feel her pulse. The old doctor stepped forward to feel her pulse. He frowned and stroked his beard. Yili asked, "Doctor, how is it?" The old doctor shook his head and said, "It's nothing. But Prince better be careful. It's fine this time, it doesn't mean that it will be fine next time." Yili frowned and said, "If I remember correctly, last time the doctor said that Prince's health was very good." The old doctor raised his gray eyebrows and said, "I didn't say anything wrong. At that time Prince's health was indeed very good, but now it's obviously very bad." Yili looked at him speechlessly. Was there anyone who was healthy at the same time and weak at the same time every year? The old doctor continued, "Prince's body can't stand the cold. As long as winter comes he has to be careful. But it shouldn't be so serious now. This time, how long has it been since Prince took medicine? How long has it been since he rested?" Chapter 141. Under Yili's glare, Emo Shuyao helplessly smiled bitterly. "Your medicine doesn't seem to have any effect," Emo Shuyao lightly said as he took out a small bottle of medicine from his sleeve. The old doctor frowned as he took the medicine from Emo Shuyao's hand and opened it to check. He said, "That's impossible. It hasn't even been 2 months since it was made. How could it lose its effect?" Yili said, "Doctor, I think Prince means that your medicine doesn't have any effect on his body." The old doctor's face sank. He once again took Emo Shuyao's hand to check his pulse, but this time it was clearly longer. After a while the old doctor put down his hand and said with a frown, "I'll first write a prescription for Prince to use. There shouldn't be any problems for now. I need to go back and study the prescription first." Yili also knew that this kind of thing couldn't be rushed. She could only nod and say, "Then I'll have to trouble doctor." The old doctor nodded and looked at Yili. This old man will say it again. With Prince's condition he definitely can't overwork himself. The closer it is to winter the more careful he needs to be. If he didn't do anything these past few years, then his condition wouldn't be so serious right now. Yili nodded and said seriously, "I understand. Doctor, please don't worry." She had someone follow the old doctor to get the medicine. After Yili settled Emo Shuyao down, she was about to get up when someone pulled her from behind. Yili turned her head to look at the man on the bed who was calmly looking at her. Her gaze fell on his somewhat pale and thin hand. Her heart couldn't help but twitch. "What's wrong? Where do you feel uncomfortable?" Emo Shuyao shook his head and said with a faint smile, "Is Li very busy?" It's It's fine. There were some things in the study that needed to be taken care of, but it wasn't anything urgent. She was just used to taking care of things in her hands. Then, can Li stay with me for a while? Emo Shuyao said softly. He looked at Yi Li with a gentle gaze, but Yi Li couldn't bring herself to reject him. Silently returning to the bedside, the smile in her eyes deepened as she looked at the man lying on the bed. Yi Li glanced at the dark red stains on the floor that had not been cleaned up in time and asked worriedly, "Don't you want to sleep for a while?" Emo Shuyao shook his head and said indifferently, "It's a bit cold, I can't sleep." Yi Li remembered that people who had lost a lot of blood would indeed feel very cold. Perhaps people who had vomited blood would also feel the same. She unconsciously reached out to pull up the blanket for him and asked, "Do you need charcoal?" It was just the beginning of winter, so it wasn't too cold. However, many people had already lit charcoal fires in their houses. Many noble families had prepared large amounts of silver charcoal. Because Yi Li's body was very good, after Lady Su had passed away, no one had used charcoal in the winter. Since they didn't have any charcoal fires in their rooms, she hadn't noticed this problem. After all, Emo Shuyao's internal energy was much stronger than hers. Emo Shuyao shook his head helplessly. "I can't smell the smoke from charcoal fires. Although the special silver charcoal is said to be odorless and smokeless, but... Li, do you understand now? Once winter comes, I really am a cripple." As he said this, Emo Shuyao's eyes were filled with bitterness and sorrow. Yi Li got up and took out another blanket from the cupboard to cover Emo Shuyao's body. She then asked with a frown, "What kind of injury did you suffer? Why is it so strange?" Normally, when both legs were crippled, even if they were amputated, they would only have occasional hallucinations and pain. However, Emo Shuyao couldn't stand the cold. Once winter came, his body would become weak. It definitely had nothing to do with his legs. Also, he couldn't breathe in smoke. It should be a problem with his respiratory system or lungs. Emo Shuyao said, "I don't know what kind of injury I suffered. When I woke up, it was already more than a month later. My body was already like this." Emo Shuyao's expression was indifferent, as if he was just stating a fact. However, Yi Li had seen this kind of expression many times. Many of his comrades who had been seriously injured on the battlefield would have this kind of indifferent expression after they woke up and calmed down from their madness. However, it was even more heartbreaking than when they were shouting crazily. Yi Li didn't know what kind of expression Emo Shuyao would have when he woke up and found himself like this. However, his current calm expression made her feel very uncomfortable. "Alright, then according to the doctor's instructions, I'll have to trouble Prince to rest more. I heard that Prince has been spending an average of 14 hours in the study room every day?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Emo Shuyao stared blankly and sighed softly. "Li, I will pay attention, but now wasn't the time to rest." In this half a year, the situation in the imperial court had become more and more strange. Ding King's residence seemed to be outside the imperial court, but if they weren't careful, they would fall into the abyss. As for him as Prince Ding, he was duty-bound to shoulder some responsibilities. Yi Li glanced at him with a dangerous gaze and said indifferently, "Is there anything that you can do that I can't? Even so, wait until you really can't handle it." "Forgive me for speaking out of turn, Your Highness Prince Ding. No matter how much effort you put in, if you take 99 steps and die at the last step, then it will still be considered a failure. So, before you take the 99 steps, it's best that you consider whether you have the life to take the 100th step." Emo Shuyao was silent for a while before he looked at Yi Li and smiled. "Li Li is right. I'll have to trouble Li Li in the future. I thought I was the Ding King's consort," Yi Li said calmly. Emo Shuyao said softly, "Of course, you will always be my king's consort." As a result, Yi Li became even busier. Not only did she have to deal with the king's residence's internal affairs, she also had to deal with the external affairs. With Emo Shuyao's guidance, Yi Li quickly got the hang of it. Yi Li's swift and decisive style gradually made the stewards in the residence admire her. Chief Steward Emo Nurse Sun and the other elders looked at Yi Li with more gratification and respect in their eyes. Chief Steward Emo Nurse Sun and the other elders looked at Yi Li with more gratification and respect in their eyes. In order to prevent Emo Shuyao from feeling bored while resting in bed, other than meeting with some stewards, Yi Li moved all the other matters from the study to their room. While dealing with matters, she could chat with Emo Shuyao and ask any questions at any time. Emo Xiuyao was surprised to find that his king's consort was like an endless book. He could never guess how many things she knew and where her limits were. If it was another person like this that appeared by his side, Emo Xiuyao would definitely feel threatened and use all kinds of methods to test and even eliminate them. But facing the woman in front of him who was holding a pen and writing at a high speed while still diverting her attention to chat with him with a smile, he only felt as if there was a faint flame in his cold heart. Although she was smiling, it made people who felt as if they were in a world of ice and snow feel inexplicably warm and comfortable. He only wanted to indulge her in doing what she wanted to do and quietly watch her occasionally reveal a faint smile. He knew that there would be a day when she would blossom and amaze the world. A bright pearl would not be covered in dust forever. There would be a day when she would soar into the heavens. And at that time, he might not be here anymore. Chapter 142. Princess Consort. Chief Steward Mo said that Dr. He is here to deliver the medicine. Qin Yu came in to report. Yili looked at Mo Xiuyao who was sleeping soundly on the bed. She nodded to Qin Yu and said in a low voice, "Dr. He, please wait in the reception pavilion for a moment." Although it had only been a few days, Yili could feel that the colder the weather was, the worse it was for Mo Xiuyao's body. It was probably because the medicine could no longer control Mo Xiuyao's condition. Even after 2 days of rest, Mo Xiuyao's spirit did not improve. Entering the reception pavilion, Dr. He and Chief Steward Mo quickly came forward. Yili waved her hand and said, "Dr. Chief Steward Oh, there's no need to be so courteous. Sit down and talk." After Yili took her seat, the two of them thanked her and sat down separately. Dr. He took out a prescription and handed it to Yili, saying, "This is the prescription that this old man has adjusted over the past few days. Princess Consort, please take a look." Yili took the prescription and looked at it. She found that most of the medicine was not for treating illnesses or injuries, but for detoxification. "Dr. He, what is this? If this Fei remembers correctly, it will become addictive if you use too much of this medicine." Yili put down the prescription and asked in a deep voice. At the end of the prescription was the name Aphrodite. Yili knew what it was and what the consequences would be after using it. "I didn't think that Princess Consort would be proficient in medicine." Princess Consort is right. Aphrodite is an excellent painkiller, but it will become addictive if used for a long time. So this old man has been hesitating on whether to add it or not. Dr. He said with a serious expression. Yili nodded in acceptance of his explanation. "Does Prince need to take more painkillers?" "Very much. The reason why the previous medicine was ineffective was because it could no longer suppress the pain caused by the poison in Prince's body. If he didn't prescribe some painkillers, Prince's mental state would be even worse, and his body would be even weaker. It's even possible that he won't be able to wait for the antidote to be cured. Furthermore, His Highness's current body can't withstand the pain from this distance. This will cause his old injuries to relapse." Dr. He said in a deep voice. His slightly aged face was filled with exhaustion. It was obvious that he had not had an easy time in the past 2 days. Hearing Mo Xiuyao's condition, Steward Mo's expression turned ugly. "Princess, this?" Yili shook her head and said, "Farong can't be used. You've given her too much. He would become addicted in a month at most. If you become addicted to it, it will do more harm than good." Dr. He smiled helplessly. He didn't want to add so much blood, but it was too little. Ordinary people would not be able to understand the pain of Prince's poison acting up if they did not personally experience it. "Why is he fine in the summer?" Yili asked. Dr. He shook his head. "It's not that he's fine in the summer, it's just that it's much easier. This is because Prince's body is suffering from a type of cold poison. The summer weather is warm, and with the medicine that I've prepared to restrain the cold poison, as long as he takes it on time, he will be no different from a normal person. But when the weather is cold, the cold poison will wreak havoc. Prince's blood vessels will seem to freeze. In the first 2 years when it was the worst, he would even fall into a deep sleep. The past few years have been under control, but this year. Is it a problem with the weather?" Yili paused for a moment before nodding. "I understand. Doctor, please consider the prescription again. Also, what's the antidote for the cold poison?" Dr. He shook his head. "There's no antidote at the moment. Prince's cold poison was caused by the northern tribes at the border. At that time, we invited the divine Dr. Shinyang to treat the prince. The cold poison was born on a snowy peak at the border between the northern tribes and Xiling. Could be said that it was a kind of cold liquid in the coldest place in the world. It's said to grow in a cold pond at the peak of the snowy mountain. That cold pond is bone-chilling. No matter if it's man or beast, there's no chance of survival. But there's a flower called Raging Fire Lotus, growing in the cold pond. Only its lotus seed can restrain the cold poison in Prince's body. Before Dr. He finished speaking, Chief Steward Mo continued, but that Raging Fire Lotus blooms once every 10 years, and bears fruit once every 15 years. 6 years ago, the Black Cloud Cavalry sent people to wait at the foot of the mountain. Unfortunately, it'll take at least 2 more years for the lotus seed to mature. Chief Steward Mo didn't say that even if they obtained the lotus seed at that time, the Black Cloud Cavalry would have to pay a terrible price to return to the Dechu state through Xiling. But no matter what price they had to pay, the Black Cloud Cavalry would definitely obtain the Raging Fire Lotus and successfully return it to the Dechu state. Even if they had to sacrifice the lives of the entire Black Cloud Cavalry. That divine Dr. Shen doesn't have any other methods? Yili asked with a frown. She had heard of divine Dr. Shen Yang's reputation when she was still in her boudoir. He was indeed a divine doctor that even the emperor might not be able to invite. Doctor, he said, divine Dr. Shen heard a year ago that the Eastern Sea Island country has a medicinal herb called Phoenix's Tail. It has miraculous effects on cold poison. At the beginning of this year he brought people out to see. I'm afraid he won't be back until the end of December at the earliest. Yili nodded and said, I understand. Then I'll have to trouble Dr. He. Dr. He stood up and bid farewell. Chief Steward Mo remained in the main hall. He looked at Yili with a frown. His mood was very gloomy. Princess. Yili raised her head and saw Chief Steward Mo's serious but worried face. She sighed and said, Chief Steward Mo, it's been hard on you these years. Chief Steward Mo shook his head in fear and said, what is Princess saying? This old servant only hates that I can't replace the prince to suffer this pain. Back then the prince, seeing the little master who was in high spirits back then become like this, how could Chief Steward Mo feel good? But he was more worried about this young princess now. In the past half a year, the princess's performance had already exceeded everyone's expectations. The people in the Ding King's residence also sincerely admired this new mistress. The princess of the Ding King's residence didn't need to be a beauty that could cause the downfall of a city, didn't need to be overflowing with talent, and didn't even need to be extravagant. She only needed to be strong enough. But no matter how strong a woman was, she wouldn't be able to withstand the current situation. This was also the reason why the prince had always hidden his physical condition from him. As servants, they had never mentioned it in front of the princess. Yili stood up and smiled faintly. Chief Steward Mo doesn't need to be too worried. As long as the person is still alive, there will be a way. Later on, Chief Steward Mo can help me find some people who are proficient in construction. I have a use for them. Chief Steward Mo looked at Yili's figure as she slowly walked away. His dim eyes couldn't help but light up. This princess might really be different. This old servant understands. When Yili returned to the room, Mo Xiuyao had already woken up. The moment she entered the room, Yili clearly saw that Mo Xiuyao's left hand that was clenched tightly outside the blanket was trembling and spasming. But when he saw Yili enter the room, he relaxed and then withdrew back into the blanket as if nothing had happened. Yili knew that he was enduring the pain. Her heart couldn't help but waver when she ordered Dr. He to remove the painkillers. But when she saw Mo Xiuyao's gentle but firm gaze, Yili suppressed the hesitation in her heart. Mo Xiuyao definitely wouldn't like himself to become a person who had to rely on some kind of medicine to survive. Chapter 143. Lily, you're back. Yili sat by the bed. You can scream if it hurts. Mo Xiuyao smiled. Won't it hurt if I scream? Don't worry, it's just a little bit of pain. It's just that it's a bit annoying to lie in bed all day because I can't get up. I won't laugh at you, Yili said. Mo Xiuyao looked at her quietly. After a long time he asked in a low voice, Lily, can I hug you? Yili was startled. She bent down and hugged Mo Xiuyao along with the blanket. She smiled and said, you can't catch a cold right now. Just put up with it. Mo Xiuyao let out a low laugh. After a while he stopped and said in a low voice, actually, the pain is still bearable. But that cold feeling, It's like falling into a cold pond full of ice water, and it's a feeling that you'll never be able to climb out of. I've gotten used to the pain for a long time, but I can't get used to that cold feeling. Sometimes, I even feel that it's okay if it hurts a little. I'm afraid that one day I won't even feel the pain anymore. All that's left is that cold feeling. If that's the case, Lily, I really don't know if I'll be able to hold on. That won't happen. Yili hugged him and said softly, didn't divine Dr. Shin go to the East Sea to look for phoenix tail grass? In another 2 years the raging fire lotus will bear seeds. At that time the cold poison will be cured and everything will be fine. You've been able to hold on until now. What's 2 more years? Mo Shuyao nodded and said, of course I'll wait. Lily, if I don't die you'll never be able to leave me. Aren't you afraid? Before I married you, I didn't want you to die early so that I could receive your inheritance. Yili said lightly. I definitely won't die, Lili. Mo Shuyao reached out and wrapped an arm around Yili's slender waist. Yili was stunned. She pulled his hand down and stuffed it back into the quilt expressionlessly. Don't mess around if you can't stand the cold. She seemed to have made a promise just now, but she didn't seem to have said anything. Yili pondered silently. Once it was winter, the Ding King's residents rejected all the invitations and gatherings, including the palace banquet. The reason was the same as usual. Prince Ding was seriously ill. The hearts of the people who had been stirred up by the sighting of Prince Ding during the summer gradually calmed down. After the imperial physicians in the palace went back and forth a few times to no avail, other than the continuous flow of various tonics and medicinal herbs from the palace into the Ding King's manor, no one else came to disturb them. The Ding King's residence seemed to have regained its silence from the past 2 years. Of course, it wasn't that there were no visitors at all. For example, Feng Jiao was one of them. Third young Master Feng, the princess consort and the prince have invited you to the side chamber. Feng Jiao, who was waiting in the study, raised his eyebrows and asked in puzzlement, Yao is ill again? But isn't he staying with the princess consort? Why did he move to the side chamber? A faint smile appeared on Director Mo's stern face. Many thanks for young Master Feng's concern. The prince is fine these few days. A few days ago the prince and the princess consort moved to the side chamber. Feng Jiao's face was filled with envy, jealousy and hatred. It's good to have a large manor. If you want to live in the main hall you can live in the main hall. If you want to live in the side chamber you can live in the side chamber. If you're tired of living in the side chamber, you can take turns living in a few courtyards. Director Mo already knew Feng Jiao's temperament and didn't find it strange. He smiled faintly and said, if young Master Feng dislikes the small manor, you can tell the prince. The king's residence has 2 mansions in the capital for young Master Feng to live in. Feng Jiao rolled his eyes, forget it. When the manor is big there are so many people and things to do. So annoying. Young Master Feng should start a family. Director Mo followed behind Feng Jiao and said, I know. Your prince has married a good princess consort. This young master hasn't played enough. Feng Jiao waved his hand to indicate that the matter of marriage could be discussed in the future. His old man didn't care about this matter, but the elders in the king's residence were rather enthusiastic. It was a pity that he couldn't enjoy it. The side chamber that Yi Li and Mo Shuyao lived in was a separate building to the south of the main courtyard where the two lived. It was located in the inner garden of the main courtyard. It was only 2 side rooms less than the main hall. It looked more peaceful and elegant. When Feng Jiao stepped into the main hall he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. A gust of warm air hit him in the face. The entire main hall was warm and cozy like it was March or April. Feng Jiao knew about Mo Xuyao's physical condition. He also knew that as long as Mo Xuyao could appear in the Prince Ding mansion, they definitely wouldn't burn charcoal in the winter. The director Mo followed behind and said, Young Master Feng, the prince and princess consort are waiting for you in the small study. Feng Jiao couldn't help but turn around and ask, how many study rooms does your king's residence have? Director Mo replied seriously, the outer courtyard and inner courtyard each have a library and study room. In the main courtyard, the prince and princess consort each have a study room. The study room in this side chamber was set up temporarily. This young master hates study rooms and hates discussing matters in study rooms even more. Feng Jiao said. Then, this subordinate will ask princess consort and prince to come out? Forget it. I don't dare to ask them to come out and see me personally. Feng Xiao waved his hand and swaggered away while fanning himself. When he stepped into the study room and saw the two people sitting in the room playing chess, Feng Xiao felt like he was about to envy Mo Xiao's days. I say, Prince, it's not right to let others work themselves to death outside while you play chess at home. Feng Xiao lazily leaned against the door and lightly mocked. How could people be mentally balanced in this world? Those who had a hard life had to rush about in the cold wind and rain all day just like him. Those who had a good life could leisurely sit in a warm study room and play chess, accompanied by a beauty. Just like Mo Xiao. Yili smiled and glanced at Feng Xiao. Although young Master Feng's coquettish face was filled with displeasure, the smile in his eyes was more genuine than usual. It could be seen that he was not in a bad mood. Mo Xiao put down a piece and then raised his head to look at Feng Xiao, asking, "What is it?" Feng Xiao slowly walked in while fanning himself, saying, "Can't I come to see you if there's nothing? Marrying a princess really is different. At this time in the past you would be lying in bed half dead." Feng Xiao clearly did not mind poking at Mo Xiao's scars. He swaggered to the side and found a place to sit down. He examined the furnishings in the room and said, "A few days ago, Chief Steward Mo had Leng Er find someone skilled in construction. Was it for this side hall? Not bad, it really is not bad. Princess consort sister-in-law, Can this little brother also have a set?" Even someone as experienced and knowledgeable as the third young Master Feng couldn't figure out what was going on in this warm room. It was fine if he did not understand. It did not prevent him from knowing what it was used for. In the middle of winter, who would have the patience to burn charcoal that was as expensive as silver? It smelled bad, it was inconvenient, and it was not as warm. Yili said with a faint smile, "Actually, I don't really understand these things. If young Master Feng is interested, you can go find those craftsmen to discuss it." The ancient craftsman's wisdom was not to be underestimated. She had only drawn a rough design and put forward her own ideas and principles. Those experienced craftsmen had used less than half a month to set up this side hall's water heating system. No wonder people said that there were many lost crafts that even the machines of the 21st century could not make. Feng Xiao's eyes lit up. They are all Leng Er's people. Many thanks, Princess Consort. This young master will go find him tomorrow. When he had a warm room like this, he would hold a banquet in the Fu. He wanted to see if those arrogant fellows would drool in envy. "Prince, did that fellow Leng Er say that we can use this to earn a fortune?" "Of course. We will not forget Princess Consort's contributions." Thinking that Yili was the original creator of this room, Feng Xiao did not forget to give her a flattering smile. Chapter 144. Mo Xiao held a chess piece and said, "Leng Er calculated that it would cost at least 17,000 taels to make a greenhouse like this. Even if the cost would slowly decrease after it matures, it wouldn't be less than 15,000 taels. If the cost is too high, how many people do you think would be willing to spend this kind of money?" Feng Xiao thought for a moment before shaking his head and saying, "There really wouldn't be too many. There were many nobles in the capital and even more rich people. But if the cost of just this side hall was more than 10,000 taels, there wouldn't be many people willing to spend 20 to 30,000 taels to build a greenhouse. If it was just for a profit of 100 to 200,000 taels, there really wasn't a need. At least for now, there was no reason not to." Yili said with a smile, "Actually, Master Feng's idea isn't bad. If the cost can be reduced to around 1,000 taels, there's still a market." Feng Xiao was disdainful. What can 1,000 taels make? If it's only around 1,000 taels, then the nobles in the capital, the rich merchants, and even the average well-off merchant would likely choose a greenhouse instead of silver charcoal. Then what if it's the entire Dechu state? Or even Xiling northern militants? Yili said with a faint smile. Feng Xiao paused. Seeing that Mo Xiao didn't seem to have any intention of interrupting, he muttered to himself, "I'll mention it to Leng Er later." "The Leng Er you're talking about should be the second young master of the Leng family, Leng Haoyu, right?" Yili asked. "I don't seem to have heard that second young master Leng is close to Prince." Leng Haoyu was different from Feng Xiao and Mo Xiao, who had grown up together. He was a few years younger than them. When Mo Xiao was in trouble, Leng Haoyu should have only been a 12 or 13-year-old child. Moreover, the Leng family was loyal to the emperor. Feng Xiao nodded and looked strangely at Mo Xiao as he asked, Did the prince not mention this to the Wang Fei? Emo Xiuyao said indifferently, I sent a message to Leng Haoyu to have him come to the Wang Fu. He doesn't seem to be free. Feng Jiao seemed to have thought of something. He lowered his head and chuckled. 2 days ago, Leng Er went to drink with prostitutes and was bumped into by his future father-in-law. He was severely beaten up by General Murong. I reckon he still can't leave the house. With Leng Er's personality, he definitely wouldn't reply to Emo Xiuyao and say that he was beaten up and couldn't leave the house. Yili was startled and asked in surprise, second young Master Leng was beaten up by General Murong? That's right. Wang Fei didn't see it at that time, but General Murong really didn't show any mercy. Poor Leng Haoyu, that kid was not loved by his parents. Perhaps he was still lying in bed and ignored. Later this young master should go and see him. Feng Jiao gloated. Yili summoned someone to pour a cup of hot tea for Feng Jiao before asking, since young Master Leng is Prince's friend, is he injured? He's injured. Should we send someone to take a look? Emo Xiuyao said, just let Feng Jiao go. Without waiting for Feng Jiao to answer, he said to him, when he can go out, let him come over. Feng Jiao knew that Emo Xiuyao wouldn't let them come to the Wang Fu if there wasn't a proper matter. He immediately put away the lazy smile on his face and nodded. What orders does the prince have? Emo Xiuyao took the file that Yili handed over and said, this was just sent over from Nanjiang. Take a look. Feng Jiao glanced at Yili, opened the file and read it carefully. The more he read, the uglier his expression became. When Emo Xiuyao and Yili finished their game of chess and left to put the chess pieces back into the box, he raised his head and said, Emo Jingli secretly funded the rebellion of the Saintess of Nanjiang. What's going on? If I remember correctly, the crown princess of Nanjiang should be Princess Xixia's younger sister. In the future, once the crown princess succeeds the throne, Nanzhao will become Emo Jingli's greatest support. Emo Xiuyao held the warm teacup and said lightly, don't forget that the king of Nanzhao is only 40 years old this year. As long as there are no accidents, the crown princess will have to wait at least 20 years to succeed the throne. The king of Nanzhao and Princess Xixia are also father and daughter. Would he not support his own son-in-law? Feng Jiao said. Emo Xiuyao shook his head and said, I have interacted with the king of Nanzhao before. At the time he was still the crown prince of Nanzhao. He is very cautious and smart. He definitely would not support Emo Jingli. If he would 2 years ago when Emo Xiuyao went to Nanzhao, he would have married Princess Xixia to him and not have waited for Princess Xixia to come all the way to Dechu State. The king of Nanzhao must have been very unhappy in the match in June. The chances of either him or the crown princess supporting Emo Jingli are not high. Feng Jiao lowered his head to look at the file in his hand and said, this is also the analysis. Then, when did Emo Jingli hook up with the Saintess of Nanjiang? Feng Jiao felt that they had really underestimated Emo Jingli in these past years. In his eyes, Emo Jingli had always been a hot-tempered fool. Even though he was a high and mighty imperial son and he was only the bastard son of a wealthy merchant, he had never thought much of Emo Jingli. But looking at the messy affairs in Jing these past 2 years, which one of them did not involve Emo Jingli? Especially in the past half-year, he had discovered that there were many officials in court who supported the king of Li. It should have happened when he went to Nanjiang. After all, he had stayed in Nanjiang for a long time, Emo Xiuyao said with a frown. Do you think that person in the palace knows about this matter now? Feng Jiao asked curiously. The brothers of the imperial family fighting each other was the most interesting. They shouldn't know. Your subordinates haven't received any news yet, have they? Emo Xiuyao said. Feng Jiao's face darkened. He was in charge of receiving all kinds of news in the Ding King's manor. Now that the news from Nanzhao had already reached his manor, his subordinates had not received any news at all. Of course, he knew that it was not that Emo Xiuyao did not trust him. If he did not trust him, Emo Xiuyao would not have so easily shown him the news. But knowing that someone was more powerful than him was always uncomfortable. You don't need to feel ashamed. This news has not spread out yet. Other than the people who have seen this file, no one else knows. Emo Xiuyao did not want to hurt his good friend too much and said, but I cannot tell you the source of this news. Think of a way to hand it over to Emo Jingqi. Hand it over to Emo Jingqi? Feng Jiao raised his brows. Won't he go crazy with anger? But it's also good to let them fight among themselves. That way we will have more time to do other things. Do we need to send people to Nanjiang? Although the current chaos in Nanjiang is beneficial to us, it may not be so in the long run. Nanzhao's people were valiant. Just like Zhou, they had long coveted Dechu State's vast territory and abundant resources. However, their country was too weak. They had been defeated by Dechu State several times and had no choice but to submit to Dechu State. Right now we have no one to send. There should be someone in Nanjiang who can handle it. Let's not worry about it for now. Is there any news from the northern tribes? Feng Zhiyao snorted softly. After Shi Ling and Dechu State's marriage alliance failed, their secret dealings with the northern tribes have become more frequent. I'm afraid that Lei Tingfeng has also sensed the problem between Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi, so he decisively changed his mind. He plans to wait for Dechu State's internal strife before joining forces with the northern tribes to attack. Chapter 145. Lei Tingfeng, the Dechu State is internally unstable. Does he think that Shiling will be any better? Mo Xiuyao's smile was cold. He frowned and said, Mr. Shin should be back soon, right? Feng Zhiyao paused and said, he should be back soon. When he comes back, invite him to Shiling. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, I heard that the Emperor of Shiling has also been ill for a long time. Divine Dr. Shin's medical skills are outstanding and he will probably be interested. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. The Emperor of Shiling and Genom of Gojoseon? That seems like a good idea. I just don't know if the healthy Emperor of Shiling can tolerate Shiling having such a nameless but powerful regent. Yili sat quietly on the side and listened to the two discuss the matters of the countries. Unconsciously she fell into a trance. She understood many of the things that had happened in Jing City in the past half-year. She had seen the Emperor and the Empress Dowager using Prince Li's help in and out of the court. She hadn't thought that Mo Jingli would even involve Nanzhao. When the three of them were scheming against each other, did they think that some of the people they were scheming against were secretly working for the rise and fall of this country? Li, what do you think Mo Jingli would benefit from secretly helping the Saintess of Nanjiang? As she was lost in her thoughts, she suddenly heard Mo Xiuyao ask. Yili paused and frowned. Even if Mo Jingli has the Empress Dowager's support, he may not be a match for the Emperor. First of all, he is at a disadvantage in public opinion and morality. The Emperor was the previous Emperor's successor and is his brother. After the registration he has treated him well. Rashly opposing the Emperor has no benefits for him. Mo Jingli has always placed too much importance on Nanzhao. On the surface he has gained more than he has lost because of Princess Xixia. Therefore Nanzhao must have some faction or person that he can rely on. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, Li is right. We all feel that Mo Jingli has changed too quickly over the years. But, if one looked carefully, they would discover that he had only started to change after returning from the southern border. It was just that most people didn't notice this change. I'm sure that Mo Jingli may have been ambitious before this, but he definitely didn't have any intention of seizing the throne. Yili stood up and took out a map from a nearby cabinet. She unfolded it on the table and said, I don't know what the southern border has that makes him so confident. But in my opinion, if we can control the entire southern border, then even if Mo Jingli fails to seize the throne, the one who loses will not be him. Feng Zhiyao curiously moved over and asked, What do you mean? Yili pointed at the map and said, Mo Jingli's fief is in Ling province. It is only 300 li away from Nanzhao. The Dechu State's imperial family has decreed that the prince of the imperial family only needs to live in Jing for 2 months each year. But Mo Jingli, because of the concern of the Empress Dowager and the virtuous consort, stays in Jing for many years and doesn't return to his fief. Of course, this could also be the emperor guarding against Mo Jingli. But Ling province is still the Li King's fief. Looking at the Li King's confidence, Ling province is completely under his control. Once Nanzhao fully supports the Li King and attacks Ling province from the outside, Yong province between Nanzhao and Ling province will also be in the bag. East of Ling province is flat land. If there is enough army, the Li King can go all the way east and control most of the southwest. The reinforcements from the court, even the fastest Black Cloud cavalry, will need at least 20 days to arrive. They also need to cross the Yunlong River that runs through the entire Dechu state. As far as I know, the Dechu state doesn't have an army that is skilled in water battles. That includes the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. As her slender white hands made light gestures, Feng Jiao's expression gradually became ugly. He was more familiar with the geography of Nanzhao and the Dechu state than Yi Li. He naturally knew what would happen if the two armies faced each other. The Dechu states east of Ling province had always been peaceful. It was also far from the border, so there were very few troops stationed there. If Mo Jingli truly allied with Nanzhao to march southeast instead of Nanzhao's habit of going north, as long as they passed Shattered Snow Pass in Yong province, it could be said that half of the Dechu state south of the Yunlan River would be given away for free. If Mo Jingli is truly working with Nanzhao, it is the same as treason. He will not do such a thing. Feng Jiao gritted his teeth. However, Yi Li's words still left a deep mark in his heart. If Mo Jingli truly did such a thing, the consequences would be unthinkable. Yao. Feng Jiao turned to Mo Xiuyao, who was deep in thought, hoping to receive his approval. Mo Xiuyao's brows furrowed slightly as if he hadn't heard Feng Jiao's words. He stared at the map that Yi Li had placed in front of him, thinking about something. After a while he said lightly, with Mo Jingli's personality, if he is forced into a corner he might do something. Feng Sen, I want information on Nanjiang. The more detailed the better. Feng Jiao nodded and said, I understand. It will be delivered to you within half a month. Should we reveal it to that person in the palace? Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said, if he knows now he will immediately lead his troops south. Mo Jingli could not tolerate others coveting his country. If he really knew of this guess, even if Mo Jingli didn't want to, he would be forced to. Feng Jiao said in confusion, if Mo Jingli really has such thoughts, isn't it best to get rid of him before his wings are fully grown? Mo Xiuyao sighed softly. If we attack Nanzhao now, it will only make the king of Nanzhao and the saintess of Nanjiang put down their conflict and unite against the outside world. And we will likely be attacked from both sides by Xiling and the northern tribes. Originally we wanted to deal with either Xiling or the northern tribes first. Since Nanzhao does not want to stay put, then let's think of a way to deal with them first. Deal with them? Feng Jiao and Yi Li both looked at Mo Xiuyao. It was hard to believe that in such a short time he had already thought of a way to deal with Nanzhao. Mo Xiuyao frowned and said, since the people of Nanjiang find it too boring to do anything, let them be busy for a while. Brother Su seems to have a good relationship with the crown princess of Nanzhao. Yi Li nodded mildly. Since Su Qingchen had said this in front of them, he must have no intention of hiding it. Mo Xiuyao raised his brows and smiled. Since Jing Li secretly supports the saintess of Nanjiang as the monarch of Dechu state, and Nanzhao has always been on good terms with Dechu state, it is not unreasonable for the Dechu state to give some support to the Nanzhao royal family. Feng San suppressed Jing Li's news for now. There is no need to let Mo Jingqi know. Feng Jiao nodded and smiled. Good idea. But Mo Jingqi won't listen to you. In reality, it was impossible for Mo Xiuyao to give any advice to Mo Jingqi. No matter whether his advice was beneficial or harmful to the Dechu state, Mo Jingqi would never accept it. Mo Xiuyao was not worried about this. There will always be someone he will listen to. Also, Shattered Snow Pass. Just in case, we must have a capable person to guard it. Who is guarding Shattered Snow Pass right now? General Yunhui Guanzhong. Feng Jiao answered. If I remember correctly, Guanzhong has never won a battle in his life. Mo Xiuyao frowned. Although Guanzhong had no connection to the Mahist army, he still had some impression of this name. Feng Jiao raised his brows and smiled disdainfully. In reality, he has only fought 3 battles in his life. The first 2 were General Murong's deputy who followed along and gained a lot of military merit. The last battle was to suppress bandits. Panlong Mountain had 800 bandits. He used 5,000 soldiers and lost 1,700. But in the end he won. In addition, the last time he went to the battlefield was 7 years ago. But the most important thing is, Prince, you have a grudge against him. Chapter 146. I remember. Mo Xiuyao of course remembered. That year, Guan Pu led troops to attack Panlong Mountain. He was obstinate and didn't listen to his subordinates' advice. In just 3 days he lost over 1,000 soldiers, but they didn't even touch the outskirts of Panlong Mountain. Coincidentally, Mo Xiuyao was out on an errand and passed by the area, so he went to take a look. He happened to hear Guan Pu confidently ask soldiers to be meat shields to attack the mountain. Emo Shuyao's temper back then was much worse than it was now. He immediately whipped Guan Pu. Of course, Emo Shuyao was also severely punished by his elder brother after the incident. Find a way to change him. I don't want to see that idiot stay in Shattering Snow Pass, Emo Shuyao said. I'm afraid not. He's one of Emo Jingqi's study companions as well as his confidant. I'm sure Emo Jingli left him in Shattering Snow Pass to guard against Emo Jingli. Feng Jiao shrugged. Emo Shuyao calmly glanced at him. Feng San, make that idiot leave Shattering Snow Pass in a month. I don't care what method you use. Receiving Emo Xuyao's threatening gaze, Feng Jiao immediately put away his frivolous expression. With a serious expression, he almost swore to the heavens, "Yes, Your Highness. I think Emo Jingli should be very interested in Guan Pu. But, who will guard Shattering Snow Pass if we change the pass? Our men definitely can't. Emo Jingqi won't be reassured." General Murong, Emo Shuyao pondered for a moment before speaking. General Murong has already stayed in the capital for 2 years. Although Mo Jingqi says he sympathizes with General Murong's hard work guarding the border, you and I both know that it's not a good thing for a general to stay in the capital for a long time. It'll only weaken his spirit. Mo Jingqi wouldn't suspect General Murong as well, right? Feng Jiao asked. Otherwise General Murong was much stronger than that trash Guan Pu. Why would he leave a general who could win battles idle and use an idiot? No, he's just more trustworthy than General Murong. You go and think of a way to get Guanzhe back. I will deal with General Murong's matter. No problem, Prince. After sending off Feng Jiao, the small study returned to its original tranquility. Yili lazily leaned back in her chair as she watched Emo Shuyao continue to study the map on the table. After being together for so long, Yili understood this man. This man seemed to be very used to preparing for a rainy day, and he thought much more than ordinary people. Aren't you tired? What if what you're thinking doesn't happen? Emo Shuyao raised his head to look at her and smiled faintly. It would be best if nothing happened. If you tire yourself to death, what about the rest? Emo Shuyao smiled as he put away the map on the table. I never planned to tire myself to death. Besides, don't I have Li to help me now? I only do what I need to do while I'm still alive. If I really die, what does this world or Dechu state have to do with me? Yili was speechless. Ever since Emo Shuyao discovered that she was faster and more effective at handling the accounts than him, he used the excuse of not feeling well and refused to accept the accounts. No matter if it was the inner palace or the outer court, he even threw the accounts of the Mahist army to her to handle. This further made Yili understand why the imperial family was so wary of the Ding King's residence. After more than a month, Yili was certain that the Ding King's residence was not necessarily richer than the national treasury, but Emo Shuyao was definitely richer than Emo Jingqi. Although the Mahist army was still supported by the imperial court, Yili believed that even if the imperial court did not provide the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry with rations, the Ding King's residence would still be able to support these two armies. Just by looking at the accounts that Emo Shuyao threw to her, it was clear that there were gold, silver, copper mines, and large amounts of land and industries all over the Dechu state. When an emperor knew that he was poorer than his officials, how could he not be envious and jealous? The Ming dynasty's Shen Wansan had set a very good example for the future generations. Just as the emperor and the empress dowager were fighting both openly and covertly in the court, the Yunhui general Guan Rong, who was guarding Shattered Snow Pass, accidentally fell off the back of his horse when he was hunting. Furthermore, his beloved horse broke one of his legs. This matter seemed insignificant, but it faintly made the situation between the emperor and Li Wang even more tense. As for who would be the new general of Shattered Snow Pass, it set off another wave in the imperial court. However, the Ding King's residence that stirred up these undercurrents was still independent of the people's sight, appearing quiet and comfortable. In the elegantly decorated and comfortable bedroom, a middle-aged man in his 50s sat by the bed, holding Emo Shouyao's hand and carefully taking his pulse. The middle-aged man had a scholarly appearance, but his eyes faintly revealed a sharp light. Between his brows, there was a trace of carefree pride. Although he was a doctor, he looked more like a wanderer wandering the world. Prince said that the prescription he wrote last year is no longer effective? The middle-aged man frowned. Dr. He, who usually treated Emo Shuyao, also stood to the side and said, "That's right. Last year's prescription completely lost its effectiveness when winter came this year. Mr. Shin, Prince's illness." The middle-aged man who was Shin Yong, the imperial doctor of Dechu State, frowned and said, "Let me see the current prescription." Dr. He quickly handed over the prescription that Mo Xiaoyao had recently taken. Shin Yong looked carefully and raised his eyebrows. "This prescription is good. However, I am very surprised that you didn't add any painkillers." Since taking over Mo Xiaoyao's treatment, Shin Yong was familiar with Dr. He, a former military doctor, and naturally understood his habit of using medicine. When Mo Xiaoyao's illness acted up, no one knew better than him and Dr. He how painful it was, other than Mo Xiaoyao himself. Dr. He's heart had always been softer than his, so Shin Yong was surprised that he could endure not giving painkillers. Dr. He said with some shame, "I did add painkillers but Wang Fei was against it, so." Shin Yong finally noticed Yi Li, who had been silently standing to the side. If Yi Li wanted to, her presence could be so small that it was almost negligible. So even though he knew that Prince Ding had married a Wang Fei this year, he hadn't noticed what the Wang Fei standing behind him looked like. Raising his head to look at Yi Li, Shin Yong praised, "Wang Fei's decision is not wrong. Without the painkillers, Prince will suffer a bit more, but there won't be any troublesome side effects. Also, the speed of the poison acting up will be slower than when using medicine. This is why I have always insisted on not using painkillers. This room is well built. If nothing unexpected happens, Prince will have no problems surviving for another 2 or 3 years." When he said this, there was no joy on the faces of the people in the room. Because this meant that Shin Yang's search for the phoenix grass in the Eastern Sea had failed, or that the phoenix grass had no effect on Mo Xiaoyao's body. Dr. He still had some hope as he asked, "Mr. Shin, the phoenix grass?" Shin Yong shook his head with some regret. "The phoenix grass is effective against the cold poison. But it is very disadvantageous to Prince's body. Therefore it's better to wait until the raging fire lotus seed matures before making any plans. Of course I will see if there are any other methods in the next 2 years." Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the bed and calmly asked, "Does the phoenix grass have any side effects on the body?" Shin Yong nodded and said, "The phoenix grass can make Prince's body better, but it can't really get rid of the cold poison. Instead it uses the fire poison to fight against the cold poison. Once it loses control, not only will the cold poison in Prince's body become stronger, it will also add fire poison. At that time, even if we have the raging fire lotus seed, we won't be able to use it." Chapter 147. Dr. He asked doubtfully, "Isn't the fire poison and the cold poison just the opposite of each other?" Shin Yong said unhappily, "It's true that the cold and fire poison are opposite of each other, but not all of them can cancel each other out. In reality, most of the poisons will coexist with each other and they can form a more unpredictable poison." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "Then it's been hard on Mr. Shin this time. Since so many years have passed, there's no harm in waiting for another 2 years. Mr. Shin has just come back and you've already worked so hard. You should go rest first." Shin Yong looked with praise at the calm Mo Xiaoyao. He nodded and said, "This is the first time this one has seen Prince's mental strength. Prince Wang Fei, don't worry. Even though Shin Yang's skills are not good enough to cure the prince's poison, before the raging fire lotus matures, Shin Yong can guarantee the prince's safety. Tomorrow this one will adjust the prescription for the prince. This year the prince's body has not deteriorated too much. When the weather warms up there shouldn't be any problems." Yi Li nodded and said, "Thank you for your trouble, Mr. Shin. Chief Steward Mo, take Mr. Shin to the guest room to rest." Chief Steward Mo acknowledged and went forward to invite Shin Yong and Dr. He out. The room was silent. Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and saw Yi Li staring at him in a daze. He smiled faintly and said, "Yi Li, don't worry. If the cold poison was so easy to cure, we wouldn't have waited so many years. I originally didn't have much hope." Yi Li sat down by the bed and looked at him. She sighed softly and said, "There's always some disappointment, isn't there?" Mo Xiaoyao was slightly startled. He looked at Yi Li for a while before saying with a bitter smile, "Is it that obvious?" Yi Li did not speak. Mo Xiaoyao reached out and pulled Yi Li into his embrace. Yi Li was not used to it and wanted to reject it, but she gave up on the idea in an instant. She quietly leaned against Mo Xiaoyao and allowed him to imprison her in his embrace. Emo Shuyao hugged her tightly, burying his face in her fragrant hair. Baby, I can't accept this. Emo Shuyao's voice was filled with emptiness and despair. Yili frowned slightly and raised her hand to support Emo Shuyao's shoulder. She knew that Emo Shuyao was never as calm as he appeared to be. If he could really remain calm, then he would not be the Prince Ding who was still devising strategies even though he was bedridden. He would not be far from becoming a saint. If only father and big brother were still around. Give me 5 years and I'll be able to wipe out the entire Xiling. 10 years at most. I'll be able to drive the entire northern tribes to the barren lands in the north. At that time, no one will be able to threaten the peace of the Dechu state. The Dechu state can also truly become a more glorious dynasty than the previous one. This has always been the long-cherished wish of the Ding royal family, and also the wish of Emperor Taizu. But why did they do this? Ali, do you know when I first woke up 7 years ago? I couldn't wait to kill every single one of them. How dare they? How dare they treat Big Brother like that? Emo Shuyao hugged Yili tightly, his voice low and tired. Father said that he wanted to protect the people of the Dechu state. Big Brother also said that the peace of the Dechu state was more important than anything else. But how did they treat us? At that time I told myself, even if I could never stand up again I would still kill them. But you didn't kill them, right? Yili leaned against him and said softly. With the strength of the Ding royal family, it might not be possible to resist the entire military strength of the Dechu state, but if it was a life-and-death struggle, killing a few people was definitely not a problem. But even when Emo Shuyao was at the peak of his anger he didn't do this. Emo Shuyao was silent for a while then said softly, I can't. The soldiers of the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry have been in the army for generations, guarding the borders of the Dechu state. I can't let them bear the charge of treason. If that's the case, what about the sacrifice and perseverance of the Ding royal family and the Mahist army for over 100 years? Yili was silent. Perhaps this was the source of Emo Shuyao's pain. His intelligence and the strength of the Ding royal family made him skip the process of thinking about who his enemy was. He hated the ruler of this country and even more he hated this country. However, he couldn't simply destroy them. In fact, he had to protect them. Protecting the people he hated the most. No matter who it was, this was definitely torture. Li, there will be a day. I will kill them. Are you scared of me? Leaning against Yi Li's shoulder, Emo Shuyao asked in a low voice. Yi Li lowered her eyes and looked at the bed behind Emo Shuyao, softly saying, Didn't you already know that I'm not a cowardly person? But I know that Li Li is a soft-hearted person. Emo Shuyao laughed in a low voice. If there is a day that Li Li finds out that I'm not a good person, then I might as well tell you first. Yi Li was a little surprised and moved back a little. She saw Emo Shuyao looking at her attentively and gently. Does it matter whether I think you're a good person or not? Emo Shuyao raised his head and softly brushed the hair by her ear. Of course, Li Li is my princess. Even if one day Li Li finds out that I'm not a good person I won't let you go. Emo Shuyao smiled. That smile seemed to be bright and warm like never before. Yi Li couldn't help but feel a little dazed. She only felt a faint, slightly warm lips gently landing on her own lips. It was just a very light touch and it seemed to linger for a moment. Then she heard Emo Shuyao's laughter in her ear. Li Li, I will never let you go. There seemed to be a slight numbness on her lips. Yi Li felt that her ability to respond, which she had always been proud of, seemed to have completely stagnated. Hey, did I agree? Princess Miss Mu Rong requests an audience. Qing Wan at the door reported in a clear voice. Yi Li suddenly stood up. She looked at Emo Shuyao's smiling face and glared at him. She said to the outside, Invite Mu Rong to the flower pavilion, I'll go immediately. Qing Wan acknowledged and left. Yi Li snorted and turned to leave. Emo Shuyao reached out to grab her. Meeting Yi Li's angry eyes, Emo Shuyao smiled helplessly. Li, change your clothes before you go out. Yi Li looked in confusion at the clothes she was wearing. Even though it was slightly casual, it wasn't too rude to go see Mu Rong. Emo Shuyao said, Lung Er definitely came with Miss Mu Rong. I'm a bit tired. Go see him for me. Yi Li saw that Emo Shuyao's brows were slightly tired. She then remembered that after Xin Yang arrived, Emo Shuyao had been tormented for so long. Even though he didn't show it on the surface, but his mood was definitely not small. Her heart softened and she said in a low voice, I'll go see him. You sleep for a while. Helping Mo Xiaoyao lie down and tucking him in, Yili turned to go into the inner room to change her clothes. Mo Xiaoyao laid on the bed and watched Yi Li's departing figure, a faint smile on his lips. Li, you're so soft-hearted that I don't want to let go. So, even if you don't like me, I won't give you a chance to regret it. In the parlor, Mu Rongting looked at the elegant furnishings in the hall with great interest. When she saw Leng Haoyu leisurely sitting on the side drinking tea, she didn't forget to glare at him with dissatisfaction. I came to say goodbye to Li Li. Why do you have to be so thick-skinned and follow me? Leng Haoyu smiled with good temper. Ting Princess Consort Ding and I have met once. You came to say goodbye, can't I come to say goodbye? Mu Rongting said with some irritation. Leng Haoyu, I'm going because my father is going to Yongzhou. Why are you, a young master, running around? Be careful that you don't die of exhaustion on the way. Leng Haoyu blinked and looked at her with a touched face. Ting are you worried about me? Don't worry for Ting no matter how difficult the journey is, I will definitely persevere. Chapter 148. Leng Haoyu. Go to hell. Mu Rongting had been pestered by Leng Haoyu for so many years, but she found that she had always underestimated how thick-skinned this guy was. She was so angry that her pretty face turned red and she couldn't help but stomp her feet. Leng Haoyu looked at his angry fiancé in a good mood and drank tea with a smile. There was a trace of helplessness in his half-closed eyes. In Tinger's eyes, he would always be a hedonistic son who only knew how to eat, drink and play. He would never be as promising and capable as his elder brother. Only when he saw Ting angry at him did he feel that he was still different from others in her eyes. Cough cough. Murong, who made you so angry? Yi Li slowly stepped into the parlor and looked at the angry Mu Rongting with a smile. Only then did Mu Rongting remember that this was not her home, nor was it somewhere outside. It was the Ding King's mansion that many influential people in the capital were cautious of. She couldn't help but be shocked. She glared at Leng Haoyu and said angrily, who else could it be other than this guy? You made me so rude. Leng Haoyu stood up and bowed. Greetings, princess. Yi Li smiled and said, young Master Leng, you don't have to be so polite. Please sit down. She pulled Mu Rongting to the side and sat down. She raised her hand and pinched Mu Rongting's angry little face and said with a smile, Murong, did you come to the Ding King's mansion at this time to say goodbye to me? Mu Rongting looked at her in surprise and said with a smile, I didn't expect you to be so well informed even though you didn't leave the house. I only got the news yesterday afternoon. But time is too tight. Father has to leave early tomorrow morning, so I can only take advantage of the time today to say goodbye to you. Murong also wants to accompany General Murong to Yongzhou? Mu Rongting said proudly, of course. My father is going to the border alone. How can I not follow him to take care of him? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, General Murong also agreed to let you go? Mu Rongting wasn't young anymore. She had to get married in 2 years at the latest. General Murong might not come back for 3 to 5 years if he was stationed at the border. Mu Rongting glanced at Leng Haoyu who was sitting at the side. She pulled the braid on her chest and whispered, Father has already agreed. Originally his father did not agree, but Leng Haoyu said something to his father that made him change his mind. Mu Rongting thought with some jealousy. She really didn't know if she was her father's biological daughter or if Leng Haoyu, that bastard, was his biological son. His father actually changed his mind after listening to him. She had been begging for the entire night. Sensing Mu Rongting's dissatisfaction, Leng Haoyu touched his nose helplessly and said, Princess, actually, I'm also here to say goodbye. I will also be heading south soon. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in surprise. Young Master Leng is also going to Yongzhou? No, I'm going to Lingzhou. Leng Haoyu smiled and said, I have some business matters to deal with in Lingzhou. Perhaps I'll make a trip to Nanzhou. I heard that eldest young Master Su is traveling in Nanzhou. If we are fortunate enough to meet, does Wang Fei have any words for young Master Su? Mu Rongting looked at him disdainfully and snorted, You're doing business? All these years, other than using the Leng family's money to fool around, when have you ever done any business? Uncle Leng actually agreed to let you go out? Leng Haoyu pulled out an unruly smile. Tinger is right. My father thinks that I'm too useless, so he decided to kick me out and rely on myself. Mu Rongting didn't expect Leng Haoyu to be kicked out of the family. She used to think that Leng Haoyu would probably be raised by Uncle Leng and Brother Leng for the rest of his life. Although she hated Leng Haoyu's naughtiness, she couldn't bear to think of him going to Lingzhou alone in the future. That, if you can't live anymore, you can come to Shattered Snow Pass. My father should also need a lot of people. I knew that Ting still cares about me. Leng Haoyu held his chest and acted as if he was intoxicated. Mu Rongting was so angry that she couldn't hold back and threw a dart straight at Leng Haoyu's face. Leng Haoyu tilted his head slightly and casually waved the folding fan in his hand to the side. The dart fell into the flower pot next to him. Yili covered her mouth and chuckled. She pulled Murong Ting and said, "All right, Murong, I do have a letter to ask young Masterling to bring to eldest brother. Second young Masterling, I wonder if you can go to the study for a chat?" Leng Haoyu stood up and said, "It's my pleasure. Princess, please." Yili apologized to Mu Rongting and called Qing Shuang and the others to accompany Mu Rongting before inviting Leng Haoyu to the study. Mu Rongting was stunned as she watched Leng Haoyu's departing figure. This guy didn't seem so annoying when he was serious. "Young Masterling, please take a seat." In the study, Leng Haoyu's smile that belonged to a hedonistic son gradually disappeared, and there was a sharpness between his eyebrows. He looked like a different person and was definitely not as harmless as before. "Since you know what kind of person Murong Ting likes, why do you have to make her hate you?" Sitting behind the desk, Yili asked curiously. Leng Haoyu raised his eyebrows and smiled. There was a hint of bitterness in his smile as he said, "If it wasn't for a coincidence, the original Leng Haoyu would be like what the world sees today." Every family had its own difficulties, and the Leng family was certainly not a clean and flawless place. Yili didn't ask more about Leng Haoyu's private affairs. She just said, "Murong Ting is lively and competitive. She is destined to like someone who is stronger than her. I wish you good luck." "Thank you, Princess." Leng Haoyu smiled. Looking at the young man in front of her, Yili sighed softly in her heart. The world only saw how the emperor valued the eldest young master of the Leng family, Leng Qingyu, who was proficient in both civil and military matters, but no one knew that this young man, who seemed to be reluctant to leave brothels and taverns every day and fooled around with his friends, actually held nearly half of the assets of the Ding imperial estate. The money flowing through his hands every day was enough to make any noble family's heart beat faster. Yili slowly ground the ink, picked up the brush and wrote a few words. After drying it, she folded it and directly handed it to Leng Haoyu without even giving him an envelope. "If you meet eldest brother, you can give this to him. It doesn't matter if you don't meet him. Just deal with it casually." Leng Haoyu took a look and was sure that he didn't understand what was written on it. He didn't care and raised his eyebrows as he put the note into the secret pocket. He asked, "Does the prince and princess have any other instructions?" Yili smiled and said, "The prince has always been at ease with young Masterling's work, so I have nothing else to instruct. However, I'm afraid that we have underestimated Emo Jingli before. Young Masterling should be careful this time. Of course, there is also the safety of General Murong." Presumably, the prince agreed to let young Master Leng go because of this consideration. Leng Haoyu said apologetically, "Did the prince agree?" Yili looked at him and raised her eyebrows. "Otherwise, why do you think I want to talk to you alone?" Leng Haoyu's eyebrows flashed with joy. He had insisted on going to the south. Although the prince didn't fly into a rage, he still went against the prince's wishes. This made him feel guilty and uneasy. Yili looked at him and said, "The prince isn't feeling well and has already rested. Since he didn't stop you, he naturally agreed to your plan. It's just that the situation in the south will be tense in the future. You are different from Feng Jiao and the others. It's really risky to go to the south at this time." Feng Jiao also looked like a dissolute young master, but like Emo Xiaoyao, he had fought his way out of the battlefield when he was a teenager. The situation was also carried out in secret. Leng Haoyu had a large amount of wealth in his hands. It was really easy to attract attention. Once Emo Jingli or the emperor noticed his abnormality, it would be a fatal disaster. Chapter 149. Hearing Yi Li's words, Leng Haoyu's heart calmed down. "Princess, please rest assured. Haoyu won't ruin Prince's plans. A few years ago I had the idea of doing some small business in Nanjiang. This chaos in Nanjiang is a good opportunity. It's good that Master Ling understands. Tomorrow General Murong will set off. Master Ling is..." Leng Haoyu shook his head. I'll set off in 5 days. I'll go south by water. Yili saw that Leng Haoyu was thoughtful and didn't say anything else. She only said a few words and invited Leng Haoyu to go back to the flower pavilion to see Murong Ting. Standing in front of the majestic palace, Yili sighed in her heart. This was her 3rd time entering the palace. Due to the unpleasant experience of the previous 2 times, being summoned by the emperor to the palace this time made her more vigilant and careful. He, as the princess consort of Ding, was a woman. Under normal circumstances, even if the emperor wanted to see her, he should summon her in the name of the empress or Yi Jiaoyi. Princess Ding, the emperor is inside. Please go in. The eunuch leading the way said in a low and flattering voice. Yili glanced at him. She still had a slight impression of him. He was the eunuch who came to the Yi residence to deliver the marriage edict. Yili nodded. Qing Wan and Qing Yu were left outside. The shadow guard naturally couldn't move freely in the palace. Yili could only walk alone into the magnificent palace that symbolized power and wealth. Princess Consort Yi of Ding greets the emperor. Long live the emperor. The spacious palace seemed cold and empty because of the lack of people. Mo Jingqi sat high up in the hall, looking down at the woman who was curtsying in the hall. After a while he said, Princess Consort Ding, you may rise. Yili stood up. Thank you, Emperor. Mo Jingqi pointed to a chair indicating for Yili to sit down. He asked with a smile, since the beginning of winter Prince Ding's health has been poor. I wonder if he's better now. Yili lowered her eyes and said softly, Thank you for your concern, Emperor. The weather is getting warmer. Prince's health is still poor, but it's much better than during the winter. Mo Jingqi's eyes narrowed, carefully examining the woman's expression. She was calm and peaceful as an ordinary young woman. But this kind of calmness appeared in front of the emperor. It wasn't so ordinary. Moreover, according to the news that he had received, Prince Ding was rather concerned about this princess. How could a person without any instincts make Prince Ding care? Seemed he had made a mistake back then. Even that arrogant brother of his had suffered a few losses in her hands. Every time he mentioned Yili in front of Mo Jingli, the other party's face was as black as ink. Mo Jingqi began to wonder if marrying such a woman to Mo Xiuyao was an insult or a help. But it didn't matter. He would solve these problems very soon. You have to manage the king's manor and take care of Prince Ding. Princess Consort, you've worked hard. Mo Jingqi smiled. Emperor is too kind. These are all things Yili should do. Yili calmly replied. The two exchanged pleasantries for a long time. Mo Jingqi looked at the calm woman below and his heart grew increasingly irritated. It seemed that ever since Prince Ding's marriage was arranged, everything began to go wrong. Originally, Mo Jingli was only making small moves in the dark. But now the Empress Dowager's actions were getting bigger and bigger. He was almost directly confronting Mo Jingli in the open. Because of the Empress Dowager and Prince Li, there were some people in the imperial court who were worried. Previously, his confidant Guanzhong, who was sent to guard Shattered Snow Pass, had his leg kicked by a horse for no reason. As a result, Shattered Snow Pass had to be replaced. He sent his confidant to Shattered Snow Pass partly to guard against Mo Jingli and partly to guard against Nanzhao. Although Murong Shen was a capable fighter, he was not as trustworthy as Guanzhe. Shattered Snow Pass was such an important place. It made Mo Jingqi very uneasy to hand it over to someone who was not his confidant. But, after thinking about it, Mo Jingqi had to admit that there were not many capable people among his confidants. At least he really could not find a trustworthy candidate to replace Murong Shen. Thinking of the news he just received, that Mo Jingli dared to secretly collude with the Saint of Nanjiang, Mo Jingqi's chest burned with anger. But he could only endure it. Mo Jingli was his brother, and he had no evidence to prove that Mo Jingli was related to the Saint of Nanjiang. No matter if it was the Empress Dowager or the ministers related to Mo Jingli in the imperial court, they would not agree with him punishing Prince Li. He was the emperor, but many times he found that he was not as arrogant as he once thought. Many times even a simple decision would be hindered by all sides. Princess Ding, when I arranged for you to be married to Prince Ding, did you have any resentment in your heart? After a moment of silence, Mo Jingqi stared at Yili and asked abruptly. Yili was stunned. She quickly thought about what Mo Jingqi meant, but on the surface she said calmly, Your Majesty's arrangement of marriage is a grace to Yili. How could I have any resentment? Emo Jingqi lowered his head to look at her with interest, smiling as he said, "You were originally the princess consort that was personally arranged by the late emperor. My royal brother is talented in both literature and martial arts, and can be considered one of the most outstanding talents in the capital. But because of an imperial edict, you changed from princess consort Li to the pitiful Princess Ding. Do you really not have any resentment in your heart?" Yi Li's eyes flashed, smiling faintly as she said, "Prince Li broke off the engagement first, and then the emperor arranged the marriage. The emperor's arranged marriage happened to resolve Yi Li's predicament. How could Yi Li have any resentment? You don't hate me, then you hate Prince Li?" "That's right. From what I know, my royal brother has suffered at the hands of Princess Ding more than once." Yi Li's heart jumped, smiling faintly as she said, "Your Majesty must be joking. How could Yi Li dare to make Prince Li suffer? I wonder, what instructions does your Majesty have for specially summoning Yi Li today?" If this continued, she probably would not be able to leave the palace until noon. It was not a good thing for a woman with a title to spend too much time with the emperor without the company of a concubine. Emo Jingqi looked at her and smiled, saying, "Very good, we like smart people. Since that's the case, we won't beat around the bush with Princess Consort. Princess Ding, does Prince Ding know about the matter of Emo Jingli colluding with the Saint of Nanjiang?" Yi Li lowered her eyes, respectfully saying, "Replying to your Majesty, Yi Li is slow-witted. Yi Li does not understand the matter of Prince Li and the Saint of Nanjiang." "You don't understand?" Emo Jingqi raised his brows, looking at Yi Li with a smile that was not a smile as he said, "Prince Ding trusts Princess Consort very much. From what we know, when Prince Ding was seriously ill, Princess Consort Ding personally took care of many matters in the Ding Kingdom. Princess Consort is telling us that you don't know? Does Princess Consort know? What is the crime of deceiving the emperor?" Yi Li's half-closed eyes flashed with a cold light. She lowered her head and looked at the ground, saying, "Deceiving the emperor is a capital crime. However, if your Majesty is certain that the Ding Kingdom knows about Prince Li's matter, why don't you directly ask the prince? Yi Li is only a woman. Even if she controls the Ding Kingdom, she will not interfere with the matters of the imperial court." "Impudent!" Emo Jingqi angrily shouted, glaring at Yi Li with a trace of viciousness and killing intent. If it was an ordinary woman with a title, perhaps she would be frightened by this killing intent. However, to Yi Li this bit of threat and intimidation was far from enough.